Okay, I'd like to call the order of the special meeting and public workshop by the Board of Directors and the Citizen Advisory Group of the San Ynez River Valley Groundwater Basin Eastern Management Area Groundwater Sustainability Agency, 5 p.m. Thursday, March 20th, 2025. Let's do a roll call, Dan?
Director Hartman,
Here.
Director Arona,
Here.
Director Joes,
Here.
Director Marmy, here, Director Circle.
Here.
All right, all 5 parties present.
Okay, how about the CAG?
Yeah, so CAG, Sam Cohen, Sam, Tim Gorman, Mary Hayden, Dave Hunte, Charles Jackson, and Kevin Merrill.
Kevin's
Okay, Kevin may be here.
Okay. Okay, well, let's go to item number 2. Let's open public comment. Any member of the public may address the board relating to any non-agenda matter within the board's jurisdiction. Time for public comment allotted for each individual shall not exceed 3 minutes. No action will be taken by the board at this meeting on any public comment item. Do we have anybody that wishes to speak?
If there's any public comment online, please raise your hand.
Okay. And say, yeah, no one there. Okay. So for this session of the public comment, I'll close it right now. I'd like to welcome you all for coming. This is our biggest turnout. We love it. The board welcomes you here. Before we start with the presentations, I want to thank everyone who has participated in SGMA from the beginning. And I'm talking 2014 up to now. It's been a lot of activity, and it's been a long endeavor to protect our groundwater. The SGMA Act, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, was signed into law 2014, mandating all groundwater basins be managed in a sustainable manner. Our basin was designated as a medium priority basin, thus needing a form of management of our groundwater. The management of this new organization went from its beginning as a memorandum of agreement, then it progressed into a joint powers agreement, which is a big milestone for us. That was a big step. It removed us, in essence, from our agencies to an independent, self-sufficient agency. Within that, we were able to develop the GSA, which is the Groundwater Sustainability Agency. And that was another milestone for us, because we're one of 250 in the state GSAs that have been established. We saw early on the importance of a citizen advisory group, and our CAG has been very important to our organization here. I'd like to recognize them. They're up here in the front row. And then our next milestone that we were able to accomplish since 2014 was the establishment of the Groundwater Sustainability Plan. And this plan was accepted by the state. That was very important, because some GSAs were not able to get their plans approved. So we made that hurdle. And then on top of that, during the last drought we had, I think the state decided we didn't have enough work, so they put upon us, we will do well permit verification for new ones. So we had that on our plate, and we handled that, I thought, very well. Following that, I think our next milestone was hiring Dan and his group to be the executive director. So that was a definite achievement for us. But one of our biggest and most significant action that we took as this board, we decided that we needed an ag representative on our board. And I'm not saying an ag rep that just sits there and doesn't vote. We decided they have equal voting rights of all of them. Everyone's equal. And that's, we know the importance of ag. And that's why Doug's here. And we appreciate that. The other agencies, if you don't know, we have the Santa Barbara County, Joan Hartman is representing them. Solvang, we have Elizabeth.
Santa Barbara County Water Agency.
Okay. And for Solvang, Elizabeth Arona. For the Sandy River Water Conservation District, Brett Merriman, and of course Doug. For the ag and meat, I'm with ID1. I'm one of the trustees of ID1. Let's see. I'm just going through my notes here. Okay, so from the beginning, 2014 to where we are, the four agencies at the beginning, we used our staff to help get things going. So our staffs took on extra work, and it was a lot of extra work. We know that, and I'd like to recognize the staff members today. We have Matt Young with the county. Matt, he was instrumental. We had Taylor Garcia from ID1, provided information and help. Where is Taylor? There he is. Okay. Then Randy Murphy from the city, he came in, and then Bill Bulow, but he's out for medical. Is that what I understand? Yeah. Medical. Okay. So the staff really helped us, and then, of course, as I mentioned, the CAG members, they gave us a lot of public input and gave us direction, and we had some excellent consultants working for us. So now as we progress into the workshop, I want to give a little direction. In order to have things run smoothly, I think a sequence of events should be followed for each topic on the agenda. We'll have the presenter give their talk. Then I will ask the board members for initial comments. And then I'll go to the CAG for comments. And then we'll go to public. I'll open up public comment. They'll give comments. And then I'll come back to the board for any final comments. Okay? And we'll do that for each of the, I believe it's 6 items. And if you'd like to speak to the public, I really would appreciate it if you come to the podium. You tell us your name. And I'd kind of like to know if you live or work in the Eastern Management area, so we know, where you're coming from. And if we have a lot of speakers, we'll do speaker slips, but we'll first start off by raising hands and coming forward. So, yeah, I think we're about ready to go. You want to take it from here?
Actually, I get to hand it off. And pretty much immediately. So our first topic is State Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA overview. I'm going to hand it off to Matt Young with the Santa Barbara County Water Agency to give us a little SGMA history.
You guys want me here?
Wherever you want to be.
That's good.
I'm not here, so I'm going to see you. All right, hi everybody. I'm Matt Young with Santa Barbara County Water Agency. I've been involved here in the basin since the very beginning, along with some of the other staff. And I'm here to talk to you a little bit about what SGMA is, what it does, and just give a general overview. Charlotte, are you going to have the PowerPoint?
Yes, but we're having a couple of technical difficulties at the moment.
Well, I'll get going. So SGMA, Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, Director Joe's covered a lot of what I'm going to cover. But maybe we'll get into a little more detail. It was passed by the state in 2014, went into effect in 2015. It's a state law. This is not something that the local agencies chose to do. We're complying with the state law and keeping the basin under local control. And I believe our council is going to be talking a little more about that later. So the state law required us to form these GSAs, Groundwater Sustainability Agency, which we did here in San Ynez. We formed 3. We're in the eastern. There's also a central and western GSA. Some of these agencies are involved in all 3. Some are just here locally in the eastern. Again, Director just mentioned, we're a medium priority basin. We've had to do this comply. So GSAs have a wide range of authorities, but ultimately what they're tasked with doing by the state is managing groundwater. So to do that, they're authorized to manage groundwater pumpings. They can conduct groundwater monitoring, assess the health of the basin, how much water is being used, where it's flowing, things like that. And then they can collect fees to fund themselves. So there's specifically in the state law provisions for the GSAs to do these things and to fund themselves. And so that's part of what we're here to talk about tonight, is how the GSA is proposing to establish a fee. So further in the law, GSAs are required to prepare a GSP, Groundwater Sustainability Plan. So as you mentioned, this was done in 2022, it's submitted to the state. The state's approved it, so we have an active GSP that the GSA is planning to implement. Raise your hand if I use an acronym too many times. Say it again. So the Groundwater Sustainability Plan lays out the goal and the projects and management actions, everything that the GSA is going to do for the next 20 years to bring the basin into sustainability. So the law says you have 20 years from the time that you submit your GSP, so that in this case, January of 2022, to bring the basin into sustainability. So January 2042, for those of us who will still be working here, but my gray hair, I probably still will be. We will, that's the goal, is so the GSP, excuse me, lines out the projects to get us there. And so, yeah, I think we've covered all that. Next slide, please.
Just one thing, what would happen if we didn't do the GSP?
Good question. I think our council is gonna have some slides on that.
We have the non-compliance as another
Okay.
subject that we're involved.
So I'd say there's a legal answer, which is that we're gonna be out of compliance with the law and there's some consequences to that. But bigger picture, the law was passed because there was no true groundwater management in the state of California prior to this. And so there were critically overdrafted basins in the southern San Joaquin Valley and elsewhere where groundwater levels have just plummeted over time. And so without SGMA, without groundwater management, every basin is at risk of doing that. If big new development comes in, big new pumping comes in, the basin is at risk. And so SGMA and the GSA is intended to manage these basins such that we don't have these, severe consequences that have been felt elsewhere in the state.
And if I might add, if we don't do it, the state will come in.
Absolutely.
So we really had to do this.
Absolutely. And again, we're going to talk about the legal consequences later. All right. So we want the basin to be sustainable, but sustainable is one of those words that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So in SGMA, it means something very specific. The law is very clear on what sustainability means. And it means we're avoiding any undesirable results. Okay. The jargon gets complicated. So what is an undesirable result? An undesirable result means that we have bad consequences as defined by the GSA in these 6 different areas. So it says, if we have significant and unreasonable depletion of groundwater level, then, or lowering of groundwater levels over time, and that is, we are not sustainable. That's an undesirable result and we're not sustainable. Similarly, we have reduction of groundwater storage that's significant and unreasonable over time. That's not sustainable. We have water quality degradation. We have subsidence. So in some places, for example, the southern San Joaquin Valley, they pump so much and they have specific clay layers, they dewater, the ground compresses, and you actually have ground sinking significantly over time with major impacts on infrastructure. So not really an issue here as identified in our GSP, but it's something we have to look out for. Surface water depletion. So if you pump so much that you dewater a river or stream and cause significant unreasonable impacts there, that's also not sustainable. And finally, seawater intrusion, not an issue here in the upper part of the valley. And coastal GSAs is something that they're looking at. So we're trying to avoid any impacts in these 6 areas as identified in the GSP. And the GSP has specific criteria for evaluating these. The key one here is groundwater levels. We're specifically looking to keep groundwater levels of 10 feet up or above 10 feet below what they were in spring 2018. So we have identified a network of monitoring wells and we check those twice a year and manage to those levels over time. And again, this is all in the GSP, it's all on the website. I think probably at the end, there's a link to the website. If not, we can get that out. So we're trying to avoid these six areas of potential impacts. And so we've been doing this ever since we submitted the GSP. We've been monitoring. We've been trying to address data gaps at areas where we don't have full information. And we report to DWR, the State Department of Water Resources, annually. By law, we're required to. So we've been doing that and just recently submitted our one for 2024. So ultimately, DWR is our judge. They're reviewing us over time. So they review our annual report and they review the GSP results every 5 years. So we'll do an annual or a 5-year evaluation and say, we're making progress towards the goal or we're not making progress towards the goal. And then we might need to make amendments to the GSP if we need to adaptively manage over time. So that's it. Just 2 slides. Happy to answer any questions that the board, CAG, or public might have.
Okay, board, do you guys have any questions for Matt?
I guess I'll ask one. You have water quality degradation on there. Can you talk a little bit more about the measures of effectiveness used to evaluate that? Since that's not something that we've really looked at under, this board, the SGMA today.
So the GSP does evaluate water quality issues. Water quality is a tricky one under SGMA because SGMA doesn't give GSAs a lot of levers to actually manage groundwater quality. There's a lot of other state programs that are managing groundwater quality. So really, we're trying to avoid having the GSA's actions negatively impact groundwater quality. So if there's a contaminated plume somewhere, there's some chlorinated solvents or something under an old laundromat, and we're going to put in a new well and do some management there. We want to make sure that we're not moving that plume and contaminating it further. But we're not required to fix groundwater quality problems in the Great Basin. We're not dealing with nitrates or totally dissolved solvents. We're evaluating what's out there, reporting to the state, but not actively managing.
Another question? Good. Okay, let's go to the CAG. Do you have any questions for Matt? No. Oh, there's one.
Quick question, Matt. We have to reach sustainability by 2042.
Correct.
And in the process, we have 5-year updates.
We evaluate the plan every 5 years and have the option to actually amend and update the plan.
And how does that impact the scenario in which we are in before we're so unsustainable that we're having major issues with our wells? We have to wait till 42 to be sustainable, or are we gonna get sustainable prior to that?
So the goal is to be sustainable prior to that. The reason for these 5-year check-ins is that, we have the option, the GSA has the option to do some self-evaluation. Are we making progress towards our milestones? And DWR has the option to say, if you're not making progress towards your milestones, you need to be doing it. You need to be implementing your management actions. You need to be making progress. And they can step in at these checking points if they need to. It's not push everything off till 2041 and do it all at the end. You need to have this plan for the next 20 years and make incremental progress as you go.
Thank you.
Are your monitoring wells private or district or a combination of them?
Good question. And maybe for members of the public in the CAG, if you guys could say your name, just for everyone.
Very good, Matt.
So I'm Scott Vanderkar. I'm a farmer in Carpinteria Water Basin District, and I wanted to see how you're doing it up here.
So the monitoring wells are a mix. They are not, most of them are not dedicated true monitoring wells. So many of them are pumped. So some of them belong to Sullivan or ID1, and many of them are ag wells. They've been in the USGS monitoring program, most of them for decades, 30+ years. In the late teens, it actually transferred from the USGS to my agency, the Santa Barbara County Water Agency, actually doing the monitoring of these wells. They're almost all either private wells or belonging to public providers.
Okay, yeah, that was, the time was for the CAG members. Okay, no, anyone else from CAG would like to speak? Okay,
I have one question.
well, I'll get you there. You're coming real good, Toby. Hey, good seeing you again. Okay, well, let's open public comment. And for the public, would you come up to the podium? You give us your name, and if you live, work in the EMA, let us know, and then ask Matt your question. So come on up, Cody.
Oh, great.
Oh, yeah. See, it's just a bit, yes.
Maybe it's already been answered. My name is Michael Interval, and I live here and work here, and I'm a farmer. And the question was that spring of 2018 index, why was that chosen, and will that move as the years go on? Does that index move or does it stay?
It's a good question. So, the board, as they were trying to make the decision on where to set those minimum thresholds that we don't want water levels regionally to go down below, they looked at where wells were screened, right? So for those who are not active, pumpers, right? So a well is a tube in the ground, right? And some of that tube has holes in it, has a screen, has perforations, okay? So we had our consultant, and Tim Nicely from GSI is here. He's part of the team that prepared the GSP. Did an evaluation of where those wells are screened. So where's the top of the screens for all the wells that we know of here? We want to avoid impacting a significant percentage of these wells. We don't want regional groundwater levels to fall below the top of the screen. Because we can start to have impacts at wells at that point. You can have fouling and cavitation issues, and a bunch of issues can start to happen at that point. So to be protective of regional groundwater levels, we did analysis of where at the top of the screen all these wells, and what is the an index to that basically. And so spring of 2018, minus 10 feet was protective of most of the well screens of most of the well screens. And it is, the board has the discretion to change that over time as they amend the GSP, but they don't have.
Any other public like to ask Matt a question? Seeing none, I'll close the public comment on that topic, and let's bring it back to the board. Any other question? No? Okay, let's go to our next topic. Item B, importance of groundwater management and SGMA compliance. Tim Nicely will speak on this.
I'm Tim Nicely. I'm a consultant with that. I'm a geologist and a hydrogeologist, a groundwater geologist. So I have the honor of working with this agency to figure out how to manage the groundwater in the basin. So to do that, we have to answer the question, well, what is the groundwater in the basin? What is the basin? So I'm going to give a little bit of two brief discussion about the basin. And answer questions, but it's going to be on the brief side. Just this is the Santinez Eastern Management Area from Los Olivos, all the way east above Lake Kachuma, and there's a lot of land here. These are images from our groundwater sustainability plan. Matt talked about the GSP. I'm going to try to avoid all acronyms for you. The groundwater sustainability plan was submitted in January of 2022, and it checked a lot of boxes for the Department of Water Resources to encourage this local control and avoid these undesirable results that Matt talked about. So this is the basin. It includes 96,000 acres of land, and it also includes portions of the Santinez River, which is shown here in pink from the bottom of this graph here. So most of these are Santinez uplands areas, and of that 96,000 acres, the vast majority, 4,000 acres of it is idle or native. 4,000 acres is urban, and the rest, 7,000 acres is agricultural, irrigated agriculture. So the groundwater in this area occurs in the Santinez uplands of two principal aquifers. We'll skip the naming of them for the sake of speed, but the pink area is not managed under the auspices of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, because as we discussed in our plan, that is really managed by the State Water Resources Control Board as surface water. And so most of all of our work focus is on the uplands area, the yellow. before we leave the slide, Charlotte, water moves generally from here from north to south and behind me towards the river. From uphill to downhill, water does. So. Next time, please. If we were to cut through that, we would get these cross sections. This is your groundwater basin. This is what supports most of the agriculture and urban other uses of the area. I said I was going to avoid mentioning on the Passerellas formation is the tan color, and the Cariaga sand is below that. The big heavy line is the base of fresh water. It can be thousands of feet deep in the upper parts of the basin to almost nothing down by the river. The Cariaga sand happens on the west side of the basin. Solvang is limited to receive water only out of their wells from the Cariaga sand, just based on the geology. And then if we look at the next one, I'm going to be pretty quick. Thank you. This is another cross section of the same materials, but this one is from north to south. So, longer information below other rocks, in the sentence above the water. These aquifers are not underground lakes. They're wet sands and gravels. So these tubes Matt talked about pull water out for answer questions if we get them. Next slide. Great.
I got a question. Why are you calling it conceptual? I mean, we went through a lot of effort to essentially magnetically image the ground down to 1,200 feet with a helicopter flying around, if you recall. And I'm assuming that data has been reduced and put into your model. So why are you still calling it conceptual?
We're using more of the terminology that's been given to us from PWR. They require the use of what they call HCM, the hydrogeologic conceptual model. How do you understand the basin? These sections were very good understanding based on lots of wells and the analysis we did on what's where. So it is conceptual, but this is also actual. So yeah,
Which is reality,
it is as close to reality as we think we could get.
Okay.
Yeah, we have a 3D model of this, and it also goes into a robust groundwater model that we use for this. Good question, Dr. Murray. So Department of Water Resources requires us to consider all manner of water coming in and going out of the basin. It results in a groundwater budget that shows water coming in and going out, and the change in storage over time. So the barrel line, I'm pointing at the dash line here, shows the change in groundwater and storage over a long period. This going back to the 1980s. We have to include conditions since 2015, which is an important date for the Department of Water Resources. So the line going down to the right from about 2015 means that there's a decline of groundwater and storage. Since 2015, the groundwater in these two principal aquifers has declined by about 15,000 acre feet. And I would assume you know that means an acre foot is a 1 acre of land, 1 foot deep. It's 325,000 gallons. So there's been a decline in groundwater and storage. That has started to rebound in the last 2 wet years that show up on the right as 2 blue bars. And that's good news, but it's still overall net decline in this area. So those are the tools. I don't think there's another slide. I think it's the last one, right? Great. So where do we stand now? We defined these under the board, defined the undesirable results as occurring when water levels fall below a certain level. When it's written here, when water levels at more than 50% of what we call the representative wells fall below the minimum thresholds for 2 consecutive years of average and above average precipitation. I tried to make this as simple as possible. So in any year, shown here since planted, if the squares are green, we're okay. If they start to turn tan, in some of these numbers, the numbers over 50%. A little hard to see off center of the screen, but undesirable results could start occurring. So in the most recent year, water year 2024, that we just finished writing a report on, these numbers were less than 50%, so undesirable results are not yet to occur. So, although we have a net decline in groundwater and storage, the undesirable results have not been observed in the basin. So think that's as far as I was gonna go on this really brief overview on where we are with groundwater management. Because
Okay. Board, do you have any questions for Tim?
I guess one question, what's the margin of error in your calculation of the groundwater basin? Good question, Director Circle. So in the groundwater sustainability plan, we have to quantify uncertainty. And we quantify uncertainty for every part of this that I've glossed over. Agricultural pumping, urban pumping, rural domestic use, all kinds of uses. Each of them are quantified. There is margin of error. We use qualitative terms to describe them instead of quantitative terms. High, medium, low uncertainty. So obviously the more of a well is metered, the better it's a high certainty, right? The more we're actually estimating based on more esoteric, best available science, but the more esoteric the method, the less certainty we have in it. Yeah, there's error bars on for sure, but we do think that the general trend, whether it is reasonable and accurate. Thank you.
Any other questions for? Okay, let's go to the CAG. CAG, have any questions? Seeing none, let's go to the public. Any public have a question? Yes, could you come on up to the podium here?
My name is Jacob Grant. I work in the district. I heard you mention the decline of 15,000 acre feet. Could you give me that as a percentage of the basin?
Yeah. I'd rather not.
Just a ballpark.
Well, just a ballpark, because it's on there, less than 2,000 acre feet a year. Right. The total amount of groundwater in storage is very large, right? But we have to consider it as what's sustainable to meet these criteria.
And that's
So it's a small percentage of the total amount of groundwater storage, but the undesirable results can happen when one of those fall down. And what even if there is more water in storage, if it would violate the undesirable results, if it would cause undesirable results, like the wells go dry. It almost didn't, for this purpose, for groundwater management, it would seem that wouldn't really be relevant, because those wells are going dry, even if there is more water in the basin than you could get by drilling deeper. So, yeah, in the northern parts of the basin, it's several thousand feet of saturated part, obviously. I mean, pastoralist religion. And we're just considering it at the direction of the board based on the current.
And that number you mentioned, the 200,000, is that the amount that's pulled out? You just mentioned the 200,000 acre feet.
Of 2,000 acre feet a year, a little less than that, of deficit. More groundwater being pulled out than is returned by a little bit. Yeah. Okay. And that's based on what?
Thank you.
Good question. Anybody else? Public?
Tim, isn't it possible that if you have to drill those dry wells deeper and deeper, the quality of the water coming back up would be worse? And so it could have an impact on water quality.
Did you ever hear the question?
Could you repeat it?
Yeah, so would drilling wells deeper if we needed to cause a degraded water quality in any way? In areas of California, that might be the case, but that's not the case here. There's no known deep salty water organic person wells.
There are natural, like chromium-6 and mercury and so forth, down there somewhere. I mean, is that
pockets of problems.
defined level or?
There are pockets of problems, but on the whole Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, the degradation of water quality is specifically degradation of water quality due to groundwater pumping. And so, yeah, there might be pockets of problems, but they're not being moved around or exacerbated or because of groundwater, as far as we know.
Okay. Any further questions, public? Seeing none, let's close that on that issue, bring it back to the board. Any other questions?
I have a question, just one question for
Tim, we have one more question on the board.
the gentleman who asked the question prior to me is making me want to ask this question, which is just to make a point out. When we see these metrics on this particular table, it's an aggregate of all the measured wells and an average percentage across all of them. So there could be problematic wells or there might be pockets of issues. But our role is to look at the basin and its health as a whole.
That's right, yeah. We have to consider, if the smallest scale we consider is each principal aquifer, the Cariaga sand and the Paso Robles formation. Right now, we're not looking at individual problem spots and solving any problems. We are considering it basin wide. Well,
Yeah, was the point, and it's made my question.
does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, it might have been good to show the map of the representative wells that we're using on there.
Yeah, they were.
Yeah,
They were talking
it's not in the overview, but.
Okay. Okay, no more questions on that topic? Well, let's move.
We're still sort of in topic B, but I think it was kind of two distinct components, so I think it makes sense to break it up there.
Um, Okay, we're gonna go with the funding that you want to do.
We're still in the portion of groundwater. and
Oh,
stakeholder
gotcha. Okay.
We had a hydrogeologist talk, now we got a lawyer talk, so it kind of makes sense to pause and let him ask a question.
Dr. Steve?
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. My name's Stephen O'Neill. I'm a partner with a law firm called Alshire and Winder. We specialize in representing public agencies, and most of my work for the last too many years has been doing water agencies. I represent a lot of water districts and also now, since SGMA, a fair amount of these groundwater sustainability agencies. So here, I'm kind of following up on the county's presentation on what SGMA is, how it came about, and responding to the supervisor's questions about non-compliance. Because as you probably heard from the presentation, that we have to generate this groundwater sustainability plan and get it approved by the State Department of Water Resources. We've done that. However, we have to implement it. So the way SGMA is structured, it does impose some obligations and, to create the agency. The agency has to, create a GSP, do the work, et cetera. And it has to implement it. And so the kind of the built-in enforcement mechanism within SGMA is that we have to, if we don't implement it, guess who comes in? Sacramento. The state comes in and manages things. And the way it's set up is that the Department of Water Resources, who, in concert with the State Water Resources Control Board, they step in. And just want to take a little step back and talk about those two different agencies, because we swim in this pool and we use these acronyms and these words pretty fluidly, but they're different agencies. And I always think of the Department of Water Resources as the agency that runs the big statewide facilities like the State Water Project, the California Aqueduct, et cetera. That's their main charge. State Water Resources Control Board is another, it's not really formed under another set of statutes that deal with really water quality. So you probably have all heard the Regional Water Quality Control Board. Well, they're really a subset of the state board. So what happens is, with those two agencies are now in the mix in terms of enforcing and SGMA and making sure all the GSAs are taking care of their business. And as you can see from some of the language up on the slide, so these agencies make a determination as to whether or not our GSP is adequate. Well, we've cleared that hurdle, right? We got approval, which is great, because we're obligated to do that. And so now the issue is implementation, and it goes to, I believe it was your question about what happens every 5 years. Well, they don't wait for 5 years to look back at their implementation. There have been a few cases where they have stepped in, where agencies have not gotten their initial GSP approved. And there is a grace period. I'm working with another agency that kind of didn't clear the bar the first time. Now we're in this 18-month period where they give us time to meet with them, figure out where the deficiencies are, and get the plan approved. So we're in that mode right now with that agency. That's not our situation here. But if there is an implementation problem, then they could step in, and the consequences are not great. Because you'll see that if they make this determination, they put us in what's called, they determine that we are a probationary agency. They'll have a hearing and there'll be some process before they do that. But if we get determined to be a probationary basin, then frankly, you lose local control. Because the state comes in and they will determine, they'll look at our GSP, they'll look at all our data, and they will essentially take over management of the basin. Can you give me the next slide, please? So what they can do if there is if they determine, they have the hearing, they make a determination, we're a probationary basin, then they may come up with a plan, and what they call an interim plan that they'll generate, perhaps working with our staff, perhaps on their own, we don't know. But then they'll have a hearing on this plan, and if they take the plan, they have, it's kind of the same authority that we have. You know, we've, as the county explained, we have pretty broad authority, as Matt explained. We can levy fines, we can levy fees, we can do inspection, we can require monitoring of wells, et cetera. They'll have that same authority, but the challenge or the kind of the kicker here is that they do all that work, then they send us the bill. So they'll be billing this GSA for the work that they do to try and, in their eyes, correct what we need to be done here. So the consequences of failing to implement in a timely manner are pretty serious. Because, you know, this whole aspect of SGMA is to, you know, cede local control to the people who are closer to the ground and frankly closer to the groundwater. And so if we don't do this, then the state can come in and take over. And some have analogized, well, we all see it in other state activities, but it's really, sometimes they're trying to capture a butterfly with a sledgehammer. It's not a good formula. So with that, I'll turn to the board for questions.
Board, any questions?
I had one. Are there any examples where the state has come in?
That's a great question. I was looking at it today because I had heard that in Kings County, there were a couple of examples of that. But I think those were failure to get a plan approved. And so they have stepped in. And I don't think the state's anxious to do this. You know, their plate's pretty full already. So I think there have been a couple of issues in Kings County.
Did Kings County sue the board and want for stay and they're working on it?
Is that the status?
Yeah.
I appreciate that, yeah.
Okay. None from the board. Okay, do you guys have any questions? None from the CAG. Let's open it up to the public. Any questions? Seeing none? Close to the public, back to the board, still none? Okay, Dan?
Thanks for your attention.
Yeah, thank you very much. Dan, I guess you're up next here.
Yeah, the next module is funding the GSA operation and activities described in the GFP. So as was described, the EMA GSA developed a GSP, it implemented, or sorry, it got that GSP approved, but now it has the task of implementing the groundwater sustainability plan. And, you know, I saw a recent talk from one of the leads at DWR about SGMA implementation, and he really described it as developing the GSPs, and this first phase was the paper phase of SGMA. And now we're moving into more of the action phase of SGMA. You know, we not just putting something on paper, getting people to read it, we now actually have to take specific actions. And that takes money, frankly. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what's in the GSP that the EMA GSA is implementing, and then we'll talk about some of the funding that's required to support that. So if we want to go to the next slide. If you're familiar with the GSP at all, or if you're not, one of the significant chapters of the projects and management actions chapters that actually speaks to what the GSA will be implementing or could be implementing as part of the GSP implementation. And it breaks projects and management actions into three groups. The first group is that first tier or first priority management actions. Those would be initiated in the initial years of GSP implementation, and we'll go into what those are. And then the group 2 and group 3 management actions and projects are kind of what we need to do if the first group doesn't achieve sustainability. And so if we go to the next slide, What we're working on right now is those group one immediate management actions. So those include addressing data gaps through expanding the monitoring well network, performing video surveys to better understand and help us better understand where our representative monitoring wells are screened and what portions of the basin they're providing us representative data for. And then it also includes installation of shallow piezometers or wells in key areas to help us better understand surface groundwater interactions. It also includes, the group one also includes development of a groundwater pumping fee program. And so we're going to talk a bit more about that in our next workshop item. It includes development of a registration and metering program. We'll cover that in our second to last item. And then it also includes water use efficiency. Many times, improving your water use efficiency can be a low-hanging fruit. So that's something that's being evaluated. So then if we go to the next slide, we move to the group two management actions. These actions may be initiated if the group one efforts don't sufficiently address the groundwater deficits or if further local management becomes necessary. And these actions could include the development of a groundwater-based pumping allocation program, or an allocation program for groundwater, potentially limiting access to groundwater or limiting it to a certain amount. A groundwater extraction credit marketing and trading program. So that would be a program to allow pumpers to exchange groundwater, via credits, sort of like a stock market type of a system, but for groundwater. And then voluntary agricultural crop fallowing or crop conversion programs could be included as group two management actions. These management actions, as you might imagine, could have pretty substantial cost impacts and be controversial. So, the goal is not to get to group two management actions. The goal is to implement a group one and achieve sustainability through those earlier measures. If we go to the next slide, is the group three projects. And so this is that third tier. If we can't address any sustainability issues with management actions, then we could look to invest into large scale infrastructure projects to enhance groundwater recharge or to provide supplemental water to the basin. And several of the projects that were envisioned and included in the GSP include managed aquifer recharge with stormwater, potential recycled water projects involving the city of Solvang, Los Olivos Community Services District, or the Sandy Neck Band of Chumash Indians. Potential involvement by the GSA in the precipitation enhancement program or cloud seeding. And then finally, potential use of supplemental water supplies. Probably the lowest hanging fruit there would be, I don't know the most hanging fruit, but state water or river water to increase groundwater recharge through conjunctive use or in lieu recharge or aquifer storage and recovery programs. And so these projects have potential substantial costs associated with them because now you're talking about physical infrastructure. And as we all know, that can get expensive. Now I'm going to transition to talk a little bit about how the GSA and the GSP implementation has been funded to date. The GSP was funded by the Santa Barbara County Water Agency or County Water Agency, but with substantial support and involvement from the GSA member agency. And then initial operations of the GSA were funded by loans from the GSA member agencies, represented by the directors here at the table. That was an initial contribution of $200,000 for fiscal year 24-25. Santa Barbara County Water Agency is continuing to perform groundwater level monitoring for the EMA. So that's a no cost item to the EMA, thanks to the efforts of the Water Agency. And then the EMA through collaboration with the San Ynez River Water Conservation District and the other management areas, was able to get access to grant funding from Prop 68. So if you've been to our meetings or other management area meetings, you've heard us talk about the Prop 68 grant and the specific components. And these components line up with the Group 1 management actions. We have funding in the grant for demonstration projects and well registration and metering. There's funding in the grant for a rate study. That's what it is we're using to develop the groundwater pumping fee program. There's funding in the grant for some of the reporting and other requirements that I've described that we have to do for SGMA. And then there's funding in the grant to address the data gaps that we discussed earlier. And so there's a rate study now underway to develop a fee mechanism to cover GSA operational costs when the member agency contributions and the grant funding runs out. That, you know, those are not sustainable funding sources for the GSA. And so that's why the work is currently being done for the rate study. I did want to talk a little bit about the member agency contributions. As I mentioned earlier, the agencies contributed $200,000 as seed money to get the GSA up and running so that it could establish another revenue generating mechanism. And likely, and I think we'll cover this in the next item, some additional funding contributions may be necessary from the member agencies to keep the GSA up and running. You know, we're going to talk about a groundwater extraction fee program, and we're moving very fast to implement that program. But even at that speed, the revenue from that program is not going to come in until the end of this year at the earliest. And so there may be some additional funding needs for the GSA. And then there's the other thing that will get discussed is how quickly the GSA pays that money back to the member agencies will affect extraction fees and other things. So just I wanted to highlight those things because those are a couple of the considerations that are going to come up when we talk about the rate study. And just I think a couple more slides here to talk about the budget. So we've got a slide here. GSA staff presented a very initial budget to the board in January, just to kind of get this conversation started about what are the funding needs that the GSA has for administration, reporting, compliance, and GSP implementation. We got direction from the board at a subsequent meeting to really refine that budget and try to bring it down to reduce costs. And so what we have included in your agenda packet today is what we're calling an updated budget. And we really trimmed out, you know, as much as we thought we could from that original budget to bring the cost down approximately $200,000 a year. And so this updated budget, which is we're showing, if you look at you can see the bottom rows, is around $550,000 a year for internal operations and expenses, legal and technical support and contingencies. That is the budget that is being utilized in the rate study for calculating the groundwater extraction fee that we'll talk about in the next item. And then finally, our last slide, I believe, is we just, for reference purposes, we looked at some other basins that have budget information available as a comparison. And so we have budget information in categories from the EMA on the left, but Kuyama, which is it's in multiple counties, but part of it's in Santa Barbara County. And San Antonio Basin, which is, many people know, is the neighboring basin to the San Ynez Basin, and then the Paso Basin up in San Luis Obispo County. And just wanted to highlight that, GSP implementation costs money, is there's a lot of work to do. And it's what we need to do to retain local control and to, keep the state out. And so that concludes, the section on funding GSA operation and activities described in the GSP.
Okay, Joan, have a question?
I have two questions. The first is, really a comment. Maybe you'd like to just explain about the major grant we have that we pulled down, that we were able to do a lot of other work.
Yeah, I mean, the grant has been, I guess, a real godsend for funding GSP implementation. And, you know, as I described, I think there's approximately $1.2 million of the approximately $5 million that the total grant was awarded for the EMA GSA, and it's paying for many of the activities described in the Group 1 management action. And so that a lot of the work that if you've attended the EMA GSA meetings, you hear us talk about, or you attend the other management area meetings that's going on right now for GSP implementation is being made possible by the grant.
And my second question has to do with the categories, groups 1, 2, and 3. One is basically, a lot of sort of management actions. 2 is where farmers really have to start reducing, trading, whatever. And then 3 is more the infrastructure. But the state, and you've implied that we have to kind of take those in order. And that's my question, because when we did that, we didn't have Proposition 4, but Proposition 4 has 3.8 billion targeted for water projects. I don't know that we would call, you know, how much of it is going to be for groundwater, but I would think that if any of it is appropriate for the kind of infrastructure that we're thinking of, we don't want to wait till we get in trouble. We want to be opportunistic and apply for grants and jump at that money. So does the plan, the way it's sequenced, prevent us from doing that?
Yeah, and so I'm not a primary author on the plan, so I don't want to speak, but I can't imagine that the plan precludes the GSA from, you know, approaching groundwater management, utilizing one of those Group 2 or Group 3, should it identify that that is a more favorable or advantageous, you know, because of the availability of outside funding.
Answer? Okay.
Yeah, I was hoping, Dan, if you could go back to the table that you had, the EMA comparison to Cuyama, San Antonio, and Paso. And maybe kind of talk about some of the differences, like your estimate for the EMA for internal operation expenses, 252, whereas Cuyama's higher, San Antonio's lower, but then Paso's like 717, similar for technical support services. I'm wondering if your estimates are very conservative when there could be risk that we're not capturing in it. When you look at like Paso, where there's 717 for internal operations and 786 for technical support services. So do you have insight into what's driving those big numbers so that you can make us feel a little bit better about the risk? Because we don't want to, you know, achieve that.
Yeah, I mean, I've got some insights. You know, we've looked at these different budgets, you know, from the different categories. I think, you know, specific to Paso and specific to the technical support services, I believe it's, you know, Paso Basin is a higher level of overdraft. And so I think they're looking to implement more of those, what would be the equivalent of the Group 2
They're high,
actions.
moderate or medium like we are.
They're critically overdraft.
They're critically overdraft, okay.
And so I think they have a much higher budget for things like a voluntary fallowing program. And actually they're looking at a number of Group 3 equivalent actions.
Okay.
Yeah, they may be budgeting for that, and they have also received grant funding, which is paid for.
So are they facing fines too? I mean, should there have been a row for fines if they get into that category, like we know is happening in, I think, San Joaquin Valley and maybe other areas could be, if they don't have an approved GSP, they could be subject to that. So it would be good if, you know, they would budget for that. contingency, right?
Yeah, I mean, they're similar kind they have an approved GSP, so they're similar to the EMA in that sense. But, I think they're planning potentially that they need to do more management actions and or projects to achieve sustainability than maybe the EMA is envisioning at this time.
And they're much larger basin also.
There's a scale on that, maybe not. Yeah. Unfortunately, all these costs don't scale proportionally to, size of basin or pumping, but no, it is really, and was really helpful, I think, in development of the budget, was looking at these other basins and seeing what budget items they included, in informing, the proposed budget for the EMA.
Dan, did we do a similar compared to our peer group, the WNA and CMA?
We have, yeah, we've looked at their preliminary budget information that's available. And we've done some comparisons, relative to those. It gets a little bit challenging in that, it's a lot of, even with, well, all of these basins are different. There's different considerations and there's different governance structures and different management action in the GSP. And then the scale, while, it doesn't scale proportionally, there are different scales. But, we have looked at the different management areas and their proposed budgets. I would say it varies. The WMA, I think, has currently a lower proposed budget, but I think historically had a higher proposed budget. But then they're dividing that over 25,000 acre feet. The CMA, I'm less familiar with, they're dividing it, I think, over 5,000 acre feet, so it's a much smaller area, but it's a smaller budget. It's a smaller area.
I would appreciate, I appreciate that you did this because it gave proportionality. But I would think getting a view, the WMA and the CMA would give us less variance in the assumptions we're making to do a compare, just about where.
Yeah, so.
At least in the middle, or, we're not.
Yeah,
very-
so I mean, I guess, we probably were in the middle if you would add those other management, but one of the reasons that we wanted to look at two of the basins here is Cuyama and San Antonio, is those are basins that have been in operation implementing their GSPs with a revenue generating mechanism to date. The Paso Basin, they're in a similar position to the EMA. They've got a budget that they've put out there, but they have not implemented the fee and actually started working within that budget. So we thought the value in the Cuyama and San Antonio examples was these are basins and GSAs that have been operating with their own revenue generating fee. And so a bit more of a real world, more vetted data than sort of some of these budget projections that we have for these.
Why they have zero contingency, right? But ours is nearly double who's the next closest, right? So it suggests we're a startup, which we are. And it suggests we have more risk built into our assumptions. So that's double. At the 90,000, next to the 49.
Yeah, can you clarify what the 90,000 is, what you're thinking?
Yeah, so and we'll cover this a little bit more in the next presentation, but the contingency is designed to cover two things. One, unanticipated expenses. We tried to put line items to things that we know we're gonna need to pay for, but we anticipate that there are gonna be things we didn't anticipate, like a joint annual report was a recent requirement from DWR that added cost. The action plan was something that was required in the GSP approval process that wasn't envisioned when they started developing the GSP. So there may be those types of things that we can't predict that, it's good budgeting practice to have contingency funding for. And then the other piece of that is it depends on the how your revenue generating mechanism is structured. What we've got direction from the board and are working on is a groundwater extraction fee program for the EMA that is based off the previous year's estimate of groundwater pumping. And if you look at the annual report, you can see that estimate varies pretty significantly based on hydrology and other factors. And so one of the reasons for the contingency is to account for the fact that in wet years, which is great, ironically, are bad for revenue. And so it's to help protect against a revenue shortfall, in a wet year. San Antonio, for example, they have a revenue generating mechanism that is not based off water usage, it's based off acreage. And so it's a much more stable revenue generating mechanism. It's not going to change year over year. I mean, I guess it could change because I think there's an irrigated versus non-irrigated component, but I think that's going to be less variable than hydrology. I can't look to speak to Kiana and Paso around their contingencies and their mechanisms, but Paso is still figuring out how it's going to apply its rate. There's a similar process, and then, yeah, and Kuyama, I did look, they did have a very small contingency, but it wasn't a separate line item, it was buried in their admin line item, so it just didn't get pulled out.
And Paso has more technical issues they're dealing with.
I'll tell you what, I worry about that 20% contingency number. I agree with everything you just said, but typically it psychologically, it lets you be a little more risk taking or loose in your spending because you know you have a big safety. That's all.
Well, and I think Sanjay will probably cover it, but we might as well cover it now, so one of the biggest risks is the variable hydrology, right? And so if we implement the groundwater fee program that's proposed, we would implement it based on 2024 pumping estimates. If you compare 2024 pumping estimates to the 5-year average of pumping estimates, they're 15% lower. So it would be an immediate 15% revenue shortfall if we don't include a contingency.
It's interesting because I spent a lot of time on that chart and going all the way back to 1990, the ag pumping never fell below the 14,000, right? Except for these last 2 years, right? So it's fascinating that these last 2 years with GSP being invoked and 2 wet years, we saw maybe more efficiency.
Well, and unfortunately, I think there may be another potential complicated factors. I think there may have been a change in methodology for the calculation of ag pumping that occurred in 2023. And so, that's something that recently came to light. And so that's one of the reasons that, we're recommending a contingency.
Yeah, it's also the ag crops, if they're gonna use 2 feet less rainfall, if you have a large rainfall year, their usage is substantially less. And if you have 2 years in a row, there's moisture in the ground, and that's the impact of why those 2 years are.
I totally get it, but we had 5 years in a row back in 95, I can't read the chart. Back a ways, and the pumping looked constant.
Yeah, whatever. We have to have all the same accuracy in the data then too.
Yeah,
Which is what you have now.
about 1993, 94, she's looking at in the chart.
Yeah.
And the acreage the agricultural acreage could be changed between now and then. Undoubtedly,
So Dan, is there also a need to start building up reserves too as a new agency?
Yeah, so that, well, we'll cover that in the next module, but yeah, there's the budget, and then there is, the contingency component, which is part of the budget, but then there's a reserve target component that, the contingency helps contribute.
Okay.
so to John's point about state water projects,
Could you speak up some?
to John's point about state water projects, the federal water projects are available now and have been used extensively in Oxnard and Camarillo. And so, as a matter of fact, the agency there is back in Washington this week, lobbying to get some of those fees for some of the additional projects they want. So I'm agreeing with, your approach that may pay for a lot of our management action.
at least to be alert to it and be following it.
Okay, any other board questions before we go to the CAG? Okay, you guys have any questions? Mary?
It's almost the opposite of what Director Hartman had to say. Is there a time frame for implementing tier one management actions? I know that we've got Proposition 68, and that gives us until April of 2026 to get those costs done. But within our GSA, or excuse me, GSP, does it say that at what point do we decide, okay, the tier ones have not worked and we have to go to tier two, tier three? Is there a time limit there?
I mean, I think that's something that it becomes part of the 5-year eval. And so you look at how effective were the actions that you have taken with respect to achieving your sustainability goals. I don't think there's a prescribed time limit, but it's something that I believe that's why DWR built in those 5-year evals. So it's not like you get to 20 years and you go, oh, darn it, it didn't work. Yeah, so there's that. I mean, one of the things, the silver lining of getting grant funding is we have to spend it in 12 months. So that's driving a lot of action and implementation of those tier ones. You know, the data gaps, the pumping free program, the well registration metering program. So I mean, a lot of them are being implemented in a very rapid manner.
Well, I guess my concern is, you know, the 5-year study or whatever, eval, sorry, thank you, is in like 2.5 years from now, right? It's in 3 years. So it's not really 5 years since we've really implemented or tried to implement this. I guess the other part of that is, you know, our family property is also in the San Antonio basin. And they've gone much slower so that they can really get all of ag and all of farmers to get involved and understand, you know, what well registration is, being on board doing that, same with metering and how to do that. And so I guess my concern is if we feel like we have to get this done, and which I understand we need to get the cost part done by Proposition 68 and April 2026. But I hope that we can still work within tier one for a longer period so that we can get more people on board before we go a little crazy with tier two, tier three, unless we have funding.
Yeah, I mean, I think we take it at the direction of the board and with input from the CAG and the public. You know, I think there's a sense of urgency right now, as you pointed out, because of the deadline of the grant and because without a funding mechanism, there's no way to pay for much of this come the end of April next year.
Okay. Okay, any other questions? Okay, let's go to the public. Yes, see.
Okay, so,
that.
yes, I'm Lisa Severy. I do live in San Ynez. I'm on the board of the San Ynez Rancho Estates Mutual Water Company. So kind of looking ahead on a few things. So if we don't meet those first stage goals and we end up going into the second stage, kind of like what Mary was talking about, what are the consequences going to be? Are you thinking about going to some sort of a tiered rate structure that you use so many acre feet, that's your allotment, and if you go above that, you bump into a higher tier of cost per acre foot, or, you know, absolute like fines, like heavy fines for people who violate their allotment? You know, saw the credit thing, so that would, you know, obviously require some planning and dealing, if you will, to trade credits, but just, you know, what are you kind of seeing? Because I think people are going to want to know that. What are the consequences? Because the question of what do we do, you know, what happens if we don't do anything? That's my first question. I don't know if you thought that far ahead, but.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much the board has discussions about implementation of those group, you know, 2 management actions. I mean, overdraft or the pumping deficit in the EMA is roughly 10 to 15%, you know, just to get a sense for, you know, as I understand it, sort of average pumping levels relative to sustainable yield. you know, so in some ways, simplistically, I think, okay, there's the target, you know, if we can get pumping down 10 to 15%, then we can be at sustainable yield, and in theory, then we shouldn't be seeing undesirable effects. And that could be, hopefully that's done through voluntary conservation and other measures. I mean, one of the things that you'll see in any sort of, you know, you put a fee to something, that's a very high incentive for conservation, because now you're being charged for something which you weren't before, so that can incentivize conservation.
Well, I'm asking the question, is some carrots work for some people and sticks work better for others, so. There's, because I've met a lot of people in this area, and there are some who like the carrots and like the sticks, so maybe don't like the stick. Second question is, so I know at the last public meeting, we talked a little bit about the de minimis thing. So within San Ynez Rancho Estates, I don't know how pervasive this is, but we have homeowners that have private wells. So they not only use the water from the mutual water company, but they also have their own private wells. And some of them use that to irrigate their landscaping, which we're on 5 to 6 acre lots, some of them are a little larger. So there's some substantial landscaping. So will they be covered by this program as well? So like they, obviously will be impacted by the mutual water company being charged in this process, but depending on how much people are using, so whether they're irrigating vineyards or large lawns or whatever, if they have a private well that they're doing that, they could potentially be impacted as well.
I mean, that's the intent, is to, have a direct relationship between people pumping groundwater and a fee that they're paying for that benefit. Those little details, we have been working a lot on at a staff level to figure that out. It's not unique to your mutual water company. There are, other people that are within a service area who receive water from that service provider, but then also do have their own private wells. If it's large enough of an agricultural thing, it will get captured by the satellite ET crop estimating that we'll talk about later. If it's smaller than that, then maybe we can get captured through that well registration, and then potentially a metering program in the future, or some sort of self-reporting, but yeah, I mean, the intent would be to capture that as it's a use of groundwater in the EMA.
Okay. And my third question that sort of goes off of that one is, because we have this diverse, we've got water districts, we've got, large ag users, we have the smaller ag users, the mutual water companies. I'll say community education and outreach as far as how are we communicating. I haven't thoroughly looked through all the line items on the budget, so I'll be honest. But what I would hope to see, I guess, is that there be some money put towards developing like a common education point. So, what the goal of this program is. So it's not just up to the individuals and hearing it by word of mouth or something, that there's some sort of an outreach where people are hearing the same thing. It's a consistent message. Here's what's happening, so that everybody has the facts, get your website out there and making it something that, not that it's not, but it's like keeping it fresh and the people are looking at it. But really, my concern is this common understanding and message. How is that going to be attained? Because I didn't really see that covered in anything, just in the skim. So, thank you.
Yeah, it's a great comment. So there's a number of communication components included in the grant. And I think this is one of the mechanisms being utilized. But that you can always benefit with more outreach and communication. And I think that, of course, it may have been one of the items that was cut in the refined budget, but, that's why we're here to get input or to, provide their input.
Go ahead.
So, in other basins, the metering has caused a 10 to 15% reduction in water usage just by having meters put in place. It encourages conservation. And to your point, there are other basins that, the allocation's 85% of the last 10-year average. And if you go over that, there's a draconian, pumping fee for being over your allocation. And so that's an economic consequence that frankly, people can make decisions about. So,
Thank you very much.
And what's the de minimis? Isn't it 2 acres minimum
2 acre feet per year or less.
or acre? So some of these smaller wells she's talking about might fall into that?
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, I mean, if they fell under that, I think what is being considered by the GSA is a flat rate for de minimis. So they would fall under, it would be a flat, meaning it's just a fixed amount for each de minimis pumper. Because they may not have meters or we don't have any way of knowing what they're pumping, and so it's a way to, that they're paying for the benefit they're receiving. You know, there are certain legal interpretations that through Prop 218, if somebody's receiving a benefit, they need to be contributing to the cost. And even if they're de minimis, that doesn't mean that they are exempt from that. And even with and I probably should let Steve speak to this.
No, I think you captured it, Dan, that the concept is that all this effort and cost is being put forward to maintaining a sustainable basin. Every pumper is getting a benefit from that, because you're gonna have a sustainable resource, and even the de minimis pumpers would be advantaged by that. And for them not to contribute would give everybody else would contribute to the argument that there's some free riding going on, and they're not everyone's contributing.
Okay. And to her question of going to stage, those second and third level, we're not there yet. We're still in the level 1, and we're not terrible, guys. You know, we're bouncing down and we're right in there, but I'm not looking going those 2 levels right away, because you got 50% or more of the wells, you know, if you're measuring for 2 years during 2 normal rain years. If you're dropping in those scenarios, then we're in trouble. Okay, so there's 3 variables there before we hit that next level.
Yeah, understood. We have the time, but it was, the question was around, I feel I'm gonna get the question when I present this.
No.
And people are gonna ask what happens.
Those are great questions, but yeah, I don't want to see anybody scared yet. We're not going, I don't want to go there yet. Okay, any more public questions? Yes, sir.
Hearing the part about the small.
The minimums.
The minimum.
Uh-huh.
I just want to offer a different perspective than the one that I heard. If every well functioned as they do, this board might not exist, because sustainability would not be questioned.
Mm-hmm.
So to assume that they're benefiting from the management might be, I'm not sure how to say it. I think it would be worthwhile to consider making them exempt from a fee until it's necessary. I think if they are not part of an overdraft, to not charge them for them. Does that make sense?
Well, if you're pumping and you're in the management area,
Right,
you're a
but
part of it. I know.
So the management is to, I really appreciated the concise deficit that you spoke of. And that deficit is not the result of the de minimis numbers.
It's a result of everybody.
Every straw. That's funny.
I just wanted to offer another perspective that there's a way of seeing how the fee program does correlate use to contribution to the management program. And recognizing that there are very small users, I worry that just like the rest of many economic systems, the small users actually pay a higher percentage for the amount they use.
No, okay.
You know, a lot of our economic system, you buy 1 for $1 and you get 5 for $4.
Right. Could our council address you see what he was saying?
Yeah, I see the argument. It really, I guess it depends on how the de minimis pumpers are charged, I guess.
Yeah, for the minimum amount
There's
that
an
they.
opposite risk is if the exempting de minimis could create or be interpreted as an incentive, and then everyone rushes to put hundreds of less than 2 acre feet wells for pumps in place, and you get the same effect, which is multiple hundreds of straws.
I think there's a lot of obstacles that would prevent
It'd
that.
be expensive, but I think the study we're about to initiate will reveal some of those challenges in a methodology and will be the best practice in the methodology.
There can't be free riders, even if they're small free riders, is I think what you say, to be able to have a 218 tax.
Yeah, I'm just anticipating our challenges to the structure under 218 in terms of the cost there of being in relationship to the benefit conferred.
If I could just add a comment on this, because I'm gonna agree with you to some extent. Even in our little water company, we have that challenge of, my property is probably a really great example of it. It's 6 acres, but my husband and I only use 200 to 300 cubic feet a month. We planted all low water use plants that under the root calls program, so they're the lowest level that's out there. And yet our line fees and everything, if you took all the meter charges and line fee and put that in, then that adds another $200 to the bill. So while the cost of the water per 100 cubic foot is really low, that flat charge makes our water actually very expensive. So, you know, it's pretty much just our household water, but it's a, you know, big impact. So, you know, that I think is kind of what you were alluding to. It makes it feel like you're being punished for conserving water.
Okay.
Well, I was just gonna add, I mean, the goal is to make it proportional, the benefit and cost proportional to each other. So if the benefit is very small, then we would make the cost very small.
Okay. Yeah. That'd be key. Definitely needs to be fair and equitable. Okay, no other comments? Oh, yes, sir, Matt.
Yeah, I'm kind of wondering, just for a couple of points of clarification. The minimus is 2 acre feet for domestic purposes. So if you're doing anything commercial, you're not. Clarification. I heard someone say that we need a budget for fees for state intervention. To be clear, the state charges pumpers. When the state comes in, they're charging fees to pumpers, they're not charging fees. So just.
Thanks, Matt. Okay. You want to go board? You have any other? Okay, Dan, we're gonna go to this SGMA.
Yeah, so I'm gonna turn the speaking over to Sanjay with Water Resource Economics. If you've been to our meetings, you know Sanjay is the rate study consultant. Water Resource Economics is the rate study consultant that's supporting the GSA with calculating groundwater extraction fee. Sanjay?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, President, board members, staff, and public, it's my pleasure to present this rate study. We'll go to the next slide, please. And one more slide, please. So our agenda, go ahead. Our agenda today is okay. The agenda today is to discuss the goal of the study, talk about what we call units of service. That's how we're determining the rates. Member agency contribution, talking about reserves, why we need reserves, talking about contingencies, why we believe we need contingencies. We have developed four different scenarios, financial scenarios that we will be presenting to you, and then talking about next steps. So during the presentation, board members, if you, Dan, do you want me to take questions at the end or during the presentation?
I believe that to the board.
It's the pleasure of the presenter.
I'm good with you interrupting me if you like. It's up to you.
Okay.
So I won't be able to see body language, of course, because I can only see Dan's face. So if you have a question, just interrupt me. No problem. We'll go to the next slide. Thank you. So the goal of the study is to develop a fee mechanism to cover the operational costs of this GSA. So what we've done is we've worked with Dan and his staff to look at the cost of running this GSA over 3 to 5 years. We've also discussed quite a bit about what data is available so that we can use to assess the fee. We are looking at developing a 3 to 5 year fee table. We are definitely interested in hearing from the community about these fees and understanding their concerns and trying to explain to best our ability why these fees are needed. And we're hoping for a successful adoption and implementation of these fees. So the first thing is what we call units of service, and that's really about the measurement. How are we determining the cost? So there's expenditure, that's the budget, and then we call units of service, and we divide the two to get the rate. We received direction from the board on February 27th to use the 5-year average of groundwater extraction data for the calculation of the fee. We've also received direction from EMA staff to use the annual groundwater extraction estimates or metered assessed for each year. So that would be the prior year. So the numbers that we're using for the study is the 5-year average. That's 14,940 acre feet. Do note the 2024 water use of 12,808, and I'll come back to that. And Dan also mentioned that earlier on in his discussion. So this is a new agency, and as you start the operational costs, and the agency doesn't have any funding mechanism available, contribution from member agencies is needed to make sure it can function. The prior analysis assumed $200,000 from member agencies to be paid back by December 2026. Based on our cash flow analysis of what's going on, unfortunately, additional funding is needed, and we actually need to borrow $400,000 from member agencies to make sure we don't have a negative fund balance. So we're hoping for is that we would be able to receive $400,000 in this fiscal year. Fiscal years are end in June 30th, and the new fiscal year begins in July 1st. So we're hoping before June 30th we get the $400,000. We are looking at different scenarios in the financial plan about paybacks. There's a late payback that will be from 2027 to 2030, and there's an early payback from 26 to 27. Both scenarios assume an interest because there is an opportunity cost for the member agency because the member agency could have left that money in their bank and incurred some interest, and we're assuming that's at 3%. I'm going to pause here to see if there's any questions.
I have one question. You mentioned 400, excuse me, thousand. We've already put in 200. Is this 400 more making 600,000, or are you talking 400,000 total?
Total.
That's right. Okay, thank you.
Did you have a question too, John?
It was the same question. Thanks for clarifying.
Okay, Sanjay, go ahead.
All right, thank you. Reserves. So reserves are needed for an agency for cash flow reasons. The goal here is to put this fee, to assess this fee on the property roll. When you put a fee on the property roll, you do receive the revenues twice a year. However, the expenditure of this agency is not going to be twice a year. It's going to be much more frequent. It might be biweekly. It might be monthly. So there's some money that's needed just to deal with these cash flows. So you get a lump sum of money, then you can draw it down. You get another lump sum of money, and then you can draw it down. Typical standard for agencies that use to put their fees on the property roll is 50% of their operating expense. That's sort of a standard practice. We have excluded the member agency's payback because that's not appropriate, and the Prop 68 grant expense, which is reimbursed. This will change. So the operating expense will change approximately by 200 to 300,000. So each of these scenarios that we've developed looked at the following things. We've looked at we looked at the essential budget that Dan talked about. we looked at this contribution, member contribution of $400,000 and the different scenarios of payback and that 3%. These scenarios also take into account contingency. I'm going to talk about that in my next slide, and different level of contingencies. One of the challenges with this agency, so the reserves are for cash flow. Just to make sure there's been a lot of discussion about reserves and contingencies, and we're not double counting. Reserves are for cash flow issues. The idea is that you slowly build that up. And you have that money after 5 years, you're meeting that 50%. Contingency is to deal with uncertainty. And there's really two uncertainty that this agency is facing. One is expenditure. We just, it's a new agency. There's future costs that we don't know. We don't have historical information. Second is revenue. We are basing it on the prior year water sales, and the prior year water sales is substantially lower than the 5-year average. So that's why we would recommend contingencies, and we are looking at different scenarios of contingencies. So we have a 20% contingency with an early payback, a 20% contingency with a late payback, a 25% contingency with a late payback, then a 15% contingency with a late payback. And I'm going to show you the financial consequences of each one of these. So contingency, as I mentioned, is recommended to deal with risk. This agency is 100. Yeah.
Could you go back one slide? I just wonder, the 3% increase of our operating budget. So we're assuming that our budget will go up by 3% each year. And in other agencies, it's more tied to increases in cost of living. So I just wondered, is that typically why the 3%? What's it based on?
Actually, a lot of agencies is much higher than 3%. Most agencies that I work with, I work with a lot of water and wastewater agency, 150 of them in California, and most of them actually see more like a 5% or 6% increase each year. There's a lot of factors why that's so. That's not applicable to this GSA. One of them is electrical costs. We don't have any pumping of electricity here. So that's, but electricity has been going up. Another factor that is healthcare and benefits, that's much more than 3% per year. But the 3% was given to us by staff.
So Dan, that makes sense.
Well, we needed to make an assumption. I think unless there are predictions of future cost escalation increases, we can look to.
Well, I mean, we at the county, for example, usually link it to cost of living measured in the LA region, or there's the state of California. I just, this one is fixed. It just makes me a little worried that it's fixed and it's not related to cost more generally, but so I just raised that as an issue.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, I think if we could tie it, Sanjay, is that something you can tie the rates?
Yeah, I mean, you could, but our percentages will be higher than 3%. I don't know how the Santa Barbara County can do 3% per year. Not familiar with that.
Yeah, I think there's 2 rate increases that you're going to cover, right, Sanjay? So there's an assumption that operating expenses go up 3% a year, but then there's an assumption that the rates go up 5% a year.
Yeah, that's something different though. We're right now we're just talking about expenditure and costs. And and one of the things the board can do is, and with all these rates that we're looking at, is that there's something what you adopt and there's something what you implement. And the board could adopt a set of rates and decide in the future to implement lower rates if things are better. So that's always a discretion of the board.
But higher rates if they're worse.
Right.
And I mean, we have a consultant, but your firm has to pay health costs and you're gonna the fixed number worries me a little bit, but we can put a placeholder and come back to that.
Okay, Sanjay, go ahead.
So we'll go to the next slide. Then we talk about contingency, and as I mentioned, it's recommended to have contingency to deal with risk associated with cost uncertainty and revenue volatility. As mentioned, revenues will be based, the calculation of the rate is based on the 5-year average, but revenues are collected on the prior year extraction. So for instance, the groundwater extraction in 2024 is 14% below the 5-year average. So if we base the revenue on 2024 data, we will collect less than the required revenue by 14%. So to mitigate that, we're recommending a contingency of 15%.
Yeah, that's the question here.
Smart Shop 16 items, 3 cents.
Yeah, and I think just to clarify while we get Sanjay back on the screen here, there's four scenarios, but there's 3 scenarios with different contingency. The minimum recommended contingency is 15, but then there's also a 20 and 25 for its consideration.
Dan, can I, while we take this break? Oh, he's back. Can I ask a question? Because now you pointed out a few minutes ago when I asked a question about or made a point about the 2024 and 25 ag pumping rates. If they're being calculated differently and therefore they're coming out lower, we're using 2024 as a benchmark. And even including that in all of our 5-year average calculations, it's not really representing an average. Should we include 24 and 25 in our baselines?
Yes, it's a great point. It's something that we're working on at a staff level. Like I said, we kind of recently came to that potential realization that it's not just hydrology that is impacting that change in estimated groundwater pumping, but there may be methodology impacts. And so we think that we have a way where we can apply the current methodology back for the 5-year period.
And recalculate our.
And recalculate all.
Okay, as long as we all know we're doing that, and we come back and we establish what our baselines are.
Yeah.
But I think that if that's a methodology we can apply to recalculate, because now you have a break in how we're looking at the data.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And if we can normalize all that data once and then use it for all our local, that would be the ideal.
Yeah, so if we can do that, then we can see maybe we don't need as much of a contingency in that scenario. Now, the rates are still gonna be about the same, but it'll be less contingency, but it'll be potentially a higher rate.
I agree, but
Yeah.
but
Yeah,
our
we can,
averages, we're using that average as such an important benchmark. that
Yeah.
It's not a fair calculation right now.
it is,
It's not
and that's
representative.
something,
It's not
you know,
really representative.
it could be worth discussing, even if there isn't associated with methodology. A 5-year average, looking back 5 years, includes 3 historically dry years and 2 wet years. So it's not necessarily a balanced hydrologic period. So, I mean, the other option is even with that recalculation, we could consider maybe a 4-year average that incorporates 2 wet and 2 dry years, would be another way to approach it. I mean, I think ultimately it all ends up being the same amount of money that needs to get raised, but it does affect how we calculate it and how much contingency we include.
I think I got you to agree that we go recalculate the number.
See, we're working on recalculating. Yes, we're doing that at a minimum, and we're working to do that.
Okay. Okay, Sandra, you want to continue?
Yeah, next slide. So now what I want to show you is the detailed financial plan information, and I also have some graphics. So this is scenario 1, 20% contingency and early payback. Because of the early payback, actually, if you notice on the proposed fee, they're high in the beginning and then they go down because we're dealing with the early payback. So we just want to demonstrate here the challenge with an early payback, that in the beginning it's $50, but then you see by 2030 it actually drops to $32.30. We have the fees associated with Sigma. This first line, we have the member agency contribution of 400,000. We have the Sigma grant reimbursement shown right there. We have some interest income. We have total revenues shown here. We have internal operating expense. We have member agency payback that's occurring in 26 and 27 with interest. We have legal technical support. We have the Prop 68 grant. We have that contingency, as I mentioned, of 20%. We have total expense. We have the cash flow, basically revenues minus expense. And then we have the beginning balance. So in 2024, we have a negative deficit. There's a little bit of 68 grants coming in, the expenditure. But then we are positive with the $400,000 member agency contribution, and then we build up our reserves. The next chart is just basically the same information, now just a visual. So this might be a little bit easier to digest. Some people appreciate the numbers. Some people are more visual, like the graphics. So I like to show both. The graph on the left-hand side is the expenditure. So those bars are each different types of expenditures, and they're keyed there. We have operating expense in the bottom. Next, we have the grant expense. Then we have member agency payback that's occurring. And then we have the line, and the line is the revenues with, and with the higher fees, the revenues are higher, and then they go down. And whenever the line is above the bars, we're contributing to reserves. So in 27 and 28, we're contributing to reserves. And 2030, we're dipping into reserves. And then you see and then the next chart, which is on the right-hand side, is the fund balance. The dotted line is the reserve balance that we want, the 50%. We achieved that in 2027. We're slightly above, and then we dip down. And this shows the fees and the revenues. As I mentioned, this is one where we do an early payback. That's the fee is much higher and then drops down. The next scenario is a late payback with still the 20%. So this is more what we usually suggest when we do these kinds of studies, where we start off with a relative lower fee. So now it's $39.50 instead of 50 cents. And then it increases by 5% a year to eventually 48.10 Similar information. The revenues are slightly different, of course. Member contributions the same, grant reimbursement the same, interest income will be slightly different because of ending fund balance. Expenses will be the same except for the member agency payback, which is paid over 4 years, as you can see, starting in 2027, $100,000. Interest is paid off in 2030. And you see the net flows, and then you see the ending balances and the reserve targets. Again, this is the detailed information if you like those numbers, if you're a numbers person. The next slide shows the visual graphics. And then this one, we have the revenues, we have the bars associated with it, and then we have the ending balances shown here. And we have the revenues going from $39.50 to $48.10. So we go to the next slide, and this one now is a 25% contingency with a late payback. Similar somewhat to scenario 2, except the increase is now $41 instead of $39.50, and it goes up by 5% a year. Similar information. The main thing is the 39 versus 50 cents versus 41 shown here. And we go to the next slide, and it shows you that visual again. And the board consider, and I have a summary in a second. And then the last scenario is the 15% and late payback. So instead of, this is the lowest fee, this would be $38, and it'll go up by 5%, that'd be $46.20. You have, again, similar information as in all the other prior slides. Revenues are slightly different. Interest income will be different in each of these scenarios. The member agency payback is over 4 years. We have the contingency, and then we have the ending balances. And we go to the next slide, and we can see now the visual graphics of that scenario and where we are. So my last slide of all these is the summary, and this is sort of where I think the most important slide of this whole presentation is which scenario do we feel comfortable with. So there's the early payback, which is really high up front, and then we can actually lower the fee because we don't need that much revenue. If the member agencies can help us out and with late payback, then we can look at scenario 2, 3, and 4. And then the question for the board to consider is risk. How much risk does the agency want to, how much do you want to make sure with risk? So scenario 4 is sort of the minimum 15% contingency because we're using 2024 demand, which is 14% below the 5-year average. The other 2 scenarios would give us a little bit more wiggle room just in case something happens that we didn't anticipate. But these are policies that the board needs to consider and weigh out.
The question, Sanjay, so I'm going back to slide, I'm not sure what number, the member agency contribution slide. Late payback scenarios assume 3% interest. Can you explain how the interest works? Is it 3% regardless of time, or is it 3% per year?
Per year, and there's compounding.
There should be compounding, but I don't see it in your budget because the budget line items for the payback are $100,000 in each scenario.
Yeah.
And then this 159 in
Yeah,
your
we pay.
four.
Correct. We
So
pay.
what's the interest payment?
Yeah, we pay all the interest at the last year. You're correct. If
But
you
it's the
wanted
same
to,
number. It's
if
the
you
same
want-
number across all 3 scenarios. It should increase.
because it's always the same amount. The loan is 100,000. It's 400,000.
So explain how the 3% compounding works.
Yeah, so each year each year you pay 3% of the what's the residual amount left over. So the first year you pay 3% of 400,000, then you pay the next 100,000, then you say 3% of that residual with the interest occurred.
So I don't see the maybe I'm missing something. I don't see.
Yeah, I don't show you that calculation in this presentation.
So wouldn't it impact the budget?
If I understand it all, year 4, so, year 1, 100,000, year 2, 100,000, year 3, 100,000, so you're 300,000 paid back, and then year 4, it's 100,000 and plus 59,000.
But in the 3 scenarios, you would be paying more years of interest, but the 159 is the same number across all 3 scenarios. It shouldn't be increasing because you're paying more years of interest.
So can we go to scenario 1? Let's just so I can show. Maybe it'll be easier. Yeah, perfect. So we look at the where it says member agency payback, and 2026 you see 200,000, and then you see 2027 you see $231,091. So we're paying $31,000, excuse me, and $91. Sorry, it's been a long day. Of interest, right? And then we go to the next slide. One more slide, please. I'm sorry. Now, if you look at, so we pay 100,000, 100,000, 100,000, right? Member sheet, and now you see 59,258. So that 59,258 is the interest that you paid. See, so that's a different number than the prior number I mentioned. That's the interest.
Okay, keep going. One more.
Yep. Now all these scenarios are all the same.
3rd scenario.
Yeah,
they're all
slide 33, or did you see the slide 33? So the payback only changes from scenario 1, and then scenarios 2, 3, and 4 have the same payback assumption. So that it would be the same in 2, 3, and 4.
So only 3, is it 3 years or 4 years? In
2,
both
3, and
scenarios?
yeah, they're all 4 years payback. 2, 3, and 4.
So
It's the same loan. It's like the same loan that you're getting.
either
The
2
loan.
years or 4 years. No in between. That's what we're saying. Got it.
Right, want to go to summary here, please?
Do you make a decision today about late payback and level of contingency?
You know, unless you know what your board's gonna approve, like me, I need to talk to my board before I can make any decision.
Yeah, I mean, I think we need input on what the GSA board would, you know, like Sanjay to move forward with. So the next step, I don't know, Sanjay, do you wanna maybe just go to your last slide and then we can open it up?
Yeah. So the next step in this whole process is for us to write a report. So we're shooting for, you know, the rates to be adopted this fiscal year. So that's June, you know, before June 30th. We want the report to be available to the public so that they have opportunity to review it. So we want that to be published and available. So we would like the board to receive the report on April 17th. So we need direction so that we can write that report. And then the GSA can send out the Prop 218 notice on April 25th. And then people can have the opportunity to read the report and we have opportunity to answer their questions.
So we kind of need direction on where you want to head with respect to payback and whether, you know, you think your agency, now, obviously you can go back to your agency for formal approval, but we kind of need that direction.
And we need a report, support the ask, right? So we can,
Yeah,
at least in writing what we're actually. asking.
yeah, we can get more formal.
I think we're gonna hear from, our advisory committee and the public, but I would just put out there, I think the 20% contingency is sort of in the middle. That's sort of where I'm leaning now. And, the late payback, because this is all new to people, but that depends on agency willingness to defer. And I think I've already talked, the county water agency, can cover it, but I don't know about the smaller agencies, so just put that out there.
It's funny, because I was thinking the same thing. In the middle always seems like it's got the equal amount of goodness and equal amount of pain. So it was in the middle. But I would advocate, for the delayed payment, just because it gives us more runway. And I think we need to, would, continue to count on the support that my city has already exhibited to the startup of the agency. So I'll advocate for it, I can't speak for it, but I would need direction for this time.
So if I'm understanding, we're on the same page.
We're on the same page.
I just have, Elizabeth's point earlier about what's happening in the other agencies. I haven't studied their budgets, but what's been discussed was $12 an acre foot and $10 an acre foot. And if you take like Los Alamos, for instance, at $50 an acre, if you use 2 acre feet, that's $25 an acre foot. And, you know, if you use 3 acre feet, you know, it's, you know, substantially less. So the 39 is already, quite high compared to at least those numbers that have been thrown around. I don't think they're any further along than us, but you asked that question, so.
Well, it's our lowest option, right? I don't know how we can,
Well, I have to,
we have to hit that top point really hard. Can we go lower?
yeah, I mean, you know, can we control our expenses? I mean, these are, you know, these are huge numbers that haven't been charged, to your point of, you know, getting it, you know, a large amount and what's happening in other agencies, but.
Just a comment, I mean, I think we've pared back our administrative budget, from last time, and I think we're sort of at bare bones. I don't know how we go any lower. I guess we could ask staff if there are opportunities, but I hear you, because the water charges will determine where agriculture goes.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Right. For scenario 4, I think, which is the 15% contingency like payback. That one comes in at the lowest cost to our ag users.
Yeah. That's on that point too. That's, you know, I did the averages. You average of the 5 years. For scenario 1, it's $43.50. For scenario 2, it's $43.70. Scenario 3 is $45.40. And scenario 4 would be $42. Now you can see they're all like within $1.50 of each other. And yeah, I the least is better for me even, you know, that's why I like scenario 4. And when we compare to other management, we gotta make sure we got apples to apples, because there are so many variables. The denominator, you know, who's pumping 50,000 acre feet versus us at 15,000, you know, that makes a huge difference. You know, it's better if you're pumping a whole heck of a lot, your dollar per acre foot goes down, and then the numerator, it's, you know, what's that budget, you know? And, you know, Dan did really tighten his budget. You know, I had a conversation with him. I said, I want to see a ratchet. And he did it. And it looks like to me, from what I can tell, and my staff looked through it too, and they go, that's pretty bare bone and realistic.
I think, I agree with you. I don't have the data on the other areas other than what I heard. And so, you would do well to look at that data.
Right.
I mean, there's Los Alamos is the current rate.
But weren't they on the per acre?
They're on the per acre.
Yeah, and so, and we're,
Yeah, but $50 an acre and 2 acre fees is 25,000 per acre.
It's actually 40 now.
It's 40.
Oh, okay.
So if it's 40 and you use 2 acre feet, it's 20 per acre foot, or if it's, and you know, you got competing demands, but if you lose too much agriculture, you know, they're also carrying, in this scenario, 80% of the budget's gonna be paid by agriculture, and if they relocate to areas where the water is less expensive, you know, then you may not have enough usage to meet the budget, so that's another factor.
So what else can, I mean, I don't know what else we do. Given what's been laid out, I'm open, if you have any ideas.
We can ask staff to see if there's any other budget constraints that we can, you know, whether we can whittle it down any further, compare it to the other areas, and still do that.
right. And also, we need to get that apples to apple comparison, just because someone throws out $10, you know, acre foot, how they get that, what kind of,
I agree,
because,
Yeah,
I think
they
it's-
might have different burdens in their budget than,
Yeah,
than we have.
and they're both, you know, another logical question is how can they be so close, because they have very different water usage. And so, I don't know the answer, as we said here today.
And we don't have a lot of time.
and, yeah, I sure don't wanna shoo away any of our agriculture just because of our rates, that's like self-defeating there. So, but yeah, and Dan, if you could, you know, really make sure we got some decent comparisons, because if they're doing something, I'd really like to know what they're doing to get those low rates. But if it turns out we're all in the same ballpark, then I'd feel better, and I think our users would feel better.
And we can also study, you know, the budget slide showed roughly 450,000 budget. I'm sorry, 550,000 budget for us and, Los Alamos. Yeah, Los Alamos has $40 per acre, you know, to cover a similar sized budget. So I don't know if Kevin has any comments on the number of acres that are involved, but
I don't, that was irrigated, I think it's 14,000 irrigated. But I would caution you guys, this is a really accelerated plan. I'm not sure you're gonna get a 218 vote positively voted on by June. I think you're asking for a lot. I mean, we've been at it up there since 2014. And for those guys who don't know me, my name's Kevin Brown. And I've been working on the San Antonio basin since 2014. GSA member there, I helped create the water district there that funds that whole thing. That's why we went per acre there. We needed some time to get some money to get going. We're just now finishing up getting the registration process done. We have that in place. Now we know how many wells there are. Now you go out and say, okay, now we gotta put meters on there. We're just having our second reading of putting those on. And so far we've had really good response. We're not comparing apples to apples. That's a totally ag district with large growers. We don't have any cities. We don't have any ranchettes to speak of. These are farmers that farm in all other parts of the state and understand the signal. And so far, we've been lucky. I mean, we started the thing out voluntarily on a per acre basis to get them going to start the water district. And so those people have been with us all along and they will continue to stay with us. I'm afraid it's gonna happen here. You have to June to get a vote to people to vote on something they're not even aware of yet. Sometimes already left here because they just left. I'm not sure you're gonna get that done. And so what happens if you go out to the 218 vote and it goes down? You're gonna be in trouble. And so you better think about, maybe you do a per acre charge to get going, buy yourself some time. It's an option. Because I'm not sure you're gonna get that done. I don't know if you're gonna get things that way, but having gone through what we did up there, it's a long process, 2 years. And legally, you got to do things that you have to have readings, you have to go through all these things to get it done. So,
Well, I just want to respond to the comment about the vote. The Prop 218 process for fees and charges is under the course of California constitutional provisions. And the process is that we give the potential fee payers notice of the amount, why we're doing it, what is necessary, how it was calculated. And the concept is majority protest. So it's not really a vote of the populace. It's if the district receives written protests from a majority of the parcel owners who are paying, then it cannot proceed. But it's not a 2/3 vote process.
well, either way, I think you're asking the law.
And if I remember at our last meeting, we said we want to have this done as part of the property tax assessment, which puts us on an accelerated schedule. But if we can't make it, then we have a fallback that we will do the billing ourselves. But the problem with that is it's hard to collect sometimes.
I mean, you might think about the per acre charge to get going. I mean, we started that in 2014, knowing that we had to have that money in place to make it work. We're behind the 8 ball here, guys. I mean, we didn't have a budget here until just recently. And so we went the other way. We started out with a budget and figured out how much money are you gonna need. That's what we came up with a per acre charge. We need $20 an acre, what it was to get started, to get the ball rolling, and people knew signal was coming and they bought into it. I'm not sure you're in the same position here. I was just careful.
I would like to call on Matt Young, if I might, just to say.
He's hiding.
He works in a lot of water districts. He's been following this carefully, and I just value his judgment.
Did you have time to start asking?
Yeah.
Specific question.
Kevin is suggesting a per acre charge to get us going, as opposed to trying to push on a more comprehensive program like we're doing. And I'd just like to get your assessment on the two options and whether it's realistic, whether they're your thoughts.
Yeah, so, you may recall at the last board meeting that Sanjay presented to you guys, he did present the option for a per acre charge, right? And I think that your board considered what's in the GSP, that the intent of the fee is not just to raise funds for the GSA, but also as the main management action, balancing the water budget with basin, that your board had the thought that going with the volumetric fee really meets the intent of the GSP versus the per acre fee, which I agree with. So if you're asking my opinion, I agree with that. I agree with Kevin that it is a heavy lift to get this done very quickly. So certainly there are challenges there, but I do think even if it gets delayed, the volumetric fee accomplishes the goals that are in the GSP a lot better than the acreage-based fee does. So whether that's delayed more bridge funding or not, I think that's but yeah.
Thank you, that's helpful to me.
Yeah, it's interesting.
I mean, I think also in the discussion at the last meeting, there's some concern that a per acreage fee applied and I'm gonna get this wrong, but through a Prop 218 process like Steve described, it could be up for challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's, I guess more attenuated, or there's less of a nexus between the water being used and the fee that's being levied, right?
Yes, and cause like, we deal with residential, we deal with agriculture, commercial, we got it all. I believe, Kevin, you said you really honed it down just to the agriculture.
Yeah, like you were talking about the mineral users, they're exempt. We don't go after the people like it for domestic use. Now, if you have a well that does 2 acre feet, you supplying cattle draws that you're in, because it's an agricultural enterprise. But for the most part, the mineral users are exempt.
And then the acres is the total acres or acres under production?
I believe the total irrigated acres are somewhere around 13.
So it's irrigated versus just rangeland.
We do much lesser fee for, raising the land.
Yeah, that's some variables there. Okay. Jen?
If we're trying to work towards consensus, while I would prefer a 20% contingency, I'd be willing to go down to a 15% just to keep the cost lower and to get us moving on a path forward.
Hey, board, before I go out to the CAG and
So again, what's asked for is tonight is to go forward with the report is the question on the table, right?
right.
Okay. No further question here.
Okay,
Do
CAG,
we need to choose a scenario to base the report on? I think so.
I mean, provide.
Or ask for direction based on a certain scenario.
Yeah,
And maybe able to give us one scenario with the factors that would change the other scenarios so that we can make a decision.
That's a good guide. That's good guidance. I agree.
okay. Let's go to the CAG. Okay,
As far as which scenario to pick, I don't know. They're also close. I think 20% contingency would be nice if we could swallow the rates, I guess. But I'm really concerned about the basis of the rate. I think it's a mistake to do it on something other than usage. If you do it per acre, there's no real incentive for anybody to try to reduce their water use. And I think that's the worst thing that could happen.
Don't forget the grid. You catch what you're wearing, put meters on.
And then we have to deal with how do we change the basis of the rate going forward? After we've gone through the 218 process once, we would have to do it again, right?
If you want to raise it, yes.
If we want to change the base, yeah, well, it would probably raise it.
And, it's a good question because, you know, when we send out the Prop 218 notice, you have to include information about how you got there. And if you're gonna change your methodology,
That could be a
I haven't seen that before, but yeah, that's likely that would probably require another 218 process.
That's not.
What do you think, Sanjay? Have you seen that before?
I'm a bit confused. We're charging an acre feet, so I don't know what are we discussing?
The issue is if, we adopt a Prop 218 process using one methodology to come up with a fee. And the board, then decides in a subsequent year to use a different methodology to come up with a fee.
But what's the difference? I thought we were charging on acre feet, so that's why I'm a bit confused. What's the difference?
With acreage and then went to acre usage, for example.
But usage and acre feet are the same.
Not acreage.
I'm sorry, acreage.
acreage.
Oh, but we're not charging on acreage. We're talking about acre feet.
No, I'm talking about a scenario where we first
Okay.
levy based on acreage, amount of land owned.
Okay, got you
versus
now.
use. And it would be a different methodology. I think that would trigger another Prop 218 process.
Of course, yes, yeah. If we change the units, then it changes the. Yeah, but I thought we agreed that's why I'm a little bit confused at the prior meeting that we wanted to do acre feet.
Right.
So that's why I'm getting confused here.
Yeah.
Yes, that's what we discussed and decided, and with just Kevin Merrill, he's up north of us a little bit, and in their basin, they use acreage, and he was discussing that with us, and the benefits of how it benefited them to get them going quickly. And, so, yeah, we're listening.
And we've talked about that at prior meetings. And, you know, we're moving quickly here and we agreed that we're doing acre feet. And that was the sentiment that I heard from and Dan, you can chime in here with staff and with the EMA member agencies. Everyone was very had strong opinions that it should be based on acre feet.
That's correct.
Yeah, we're having a good dialogue with stakeholders
Okay.
and getting in, talking through just different scenarios.
Okay, Mary.
I have a question for Sanjay. So when I'm looking at scenario one where it's the early payback. So it looks like the fees are high and then they go low. And in that scenario, it ends up being like $32.30, right? So if you go to scenario two, it's almost inverse where the fees go up. And my question would be, in fiscal year 2031, since we don't have to pay back anymore, would it almost drop back down to the 32, 31, 30 or something like that?
That's a good observation. So you're right that the reason why the fees are different is it's really the instrument of the payback. And if you do it up front, then there's more of a higher fee. If you do it later, then it gradually goes up. And then once you pay that off, that cost is gone. And thus, you would expect the fee not to have to increase or could potentially decrease.
And would there be a mechanism in which we could like assure that it would go down to that since, I mean, I just don't want people getting used to being able to charge a higher amount and keeping it up higher because it'll bring in more money.
Yeah, I mean, you're asking to predict 6 years from now.
I'm asking if there's a mechanism in which we can add into that so it doesn't trigger a continuous increase at a higher rate already.
Yeah, and that's that mechanism is the board evaluating these fees and doing their due diligence to make sure it's appropriate.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the CAG? Okay, now we're gonna go to the public. We have a hand raised.
Okay, Lisa Beverly, Benny
You're not the village speak up.
Lisa Beverly, Sandy Nez, Rancho Estates. So the last meeting on February 27th, the charge that was proposed out there was sort of a flat $65.22, I think, per acre foot. So since that meeting, and maybe I missed this explanation, but you guys went back and cut some stuff out of the budget and really cut down the amount. Because 65.22 is quite a bit different than even the highest charge.
Yeah, so, yeah, that was, I went through it really quickly, but that was the original budget and then the refined budget. There were the number of reductions in the line items that were included, based on direction from the board. And that was really a kind of an early placeholder in this, just because we needed to start talking about this, but yeah, it's largely attributed to the refinement of the budget.
Okay. Yeah, so
a couple of things. I just want Randy Murphy, everybody knows me, I think. Just looking at this, staff was very diligent in the effort to reduce the cost. Sharpening the pencil probably won't result in any significant movement in the number. I would caution that the number as it stands risks having issues come up that were originally thought about including in the budget, but for reasons of trying to lower the budget are going to, it would have that impact. So those things may still happen. That's the advantage of the contingency and or the reserves. My other comment I wanted to say was that I'm pretty sure, I'm not positive, but I'm pretty sure public agencies can't loan money for less than LAIF. And right now it's about 4.1 or 4.2. So there's that consideration about the delayed payback. I mean, it fluctuates obviously based on a whole lot of things, but I know it's over 4, but I don't know how much over 4 it is. And then as far as which contingency percentage to consider, 15 is kind of close. I mean, the amount of fluctuation is 14% this last year. The other thing we need to think about, and it was commented on earlier, people have to start paying per unit. They conserve. So 15 doesn't give you any chance to recover if the usage drops even more.
Good point, Randy. Appreciate that. Anybody else from the population? Yes.
Again, Scott Vanderkar, I farm in Carpinteria. I was on the advisory committee, which was formed for the GSP product that was submitted, and it was just recently approved. Carpinteria Basin was not considered significantly overdrafted, and then it was. And so we got in a similar position where we had a time crunch. And what they did, and I don't know, I assume it was legal, but what they did for the first trying to get things up and running is they did I think it was a $30-some per parcel. No, all per parcel, I'm sorry, per acre, but for all parcels down to a quarter acre. And one thing that became really clear is that on those smaller parcels, nobody, oh, and it was charged through the property tax bill. Nobody saw it, especially on the small ones. And I got a neighbor the other day calling me. It was the first time after 3 years of this. She finally looked at her property tax bill and realized she's paying hundreds of dollars for a GSA fee. But in that process, it evolved to now the non-ag customers are paying through the price of metered water, the district water, because the district knows exactly how much they're pumping out of the groundwater. So that's how that's being done. And for us ag people, they did a survey overview of the valley and then sent out a notice with maps to all the ag people and said, this is how many acres of cropland we have on record for you based on this survey. And, you know, please look at that and let us know if it's wrong. And this many acres, in our case, avocados, uses this much water. If it didn't go through the meter, it must have come through the groundwater. And so you're charged that way. Well, we found out that's really unfair because it turned out that people were getting charged for groundwater and they didn't even have a well. But really, that's the way it stands right now. And you go to appeal it, and the appeal had to be done by February 28th. And you say something like, hey, all the water I used went through the meter. I didn't have a well, so that needs to come off my bill, and then they do a refund that comes through the mail. Just a point of the unfairness of it. I have 2 wells that are in the basin, and I put meters on them in July, so I don't have 12 months of meter information. But just to show the difference in the unfairness, one of those wells I calculated using the meter information, and they undercharged me $500. The other well, which is south facing, uses more water, they overcharged me $500. So I didn't submit an appeal because I figured I'd just leave it be. I came out even. But if I were the single owner of either one of those, especially the one that was overcharged $500, it would be a problem. Right. So that's the incentive of getting meters on the wells, to really find out if these assumptions are correct. And just to respond to a comment that was made earlier in the meeting about models and modeling the groundwater, there's a lot we don't know. And one of the water experts I've been working with says all models are wrong some are useful. And I think that's where we come to these assumptions that are made and this much crop is using this much water. Yeah, there's a lot of things that come into play as to how much water that crop's using. Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate that. Before council, if I'm right, last meeting, we had a discussion on parcel fees and that it's up in litigation. That's a very litigatable issue, is that?
I'm not sure exactly what you're referring to.
Well, instead of doing acre feet, actual use, actual pumpage, getting charged for use versus just parcel.
Oh, yeah.
I heard that was, it gets litigated pretty heavily.
Well, there has been litigation, but the issue I think you're identifying is really the nexus between the charge and the benefit. And I think it's much easier to defend if the charge is challenged, if it's based upon the actual acre foot or usage. If it's just charged on how much land you own, you could have inequities that make it more susceptible to a challenge.
Sorry, I want to get that.
Yeah, so I have a question. I'm not exactly sure who can answer it, but I mean, first of all, I am in agreement that the actual usage is what will create conservation for sure. But as we look out to 30, 32, I think you said, Mary, we have a lot of activity over the next 3 or 4 years, but then the activity falls off pretty dramatically. And that hasn't been, I don't know what that drop off is and how it gets factored into the rate study, but carrying it out to 32, thinking we're going to have the same budget we have today, in theory, we should be in a maintenance mode at some point. I'm asking that as a question.
Yeah, well, if that's the question.
Can I piggyback on that? Because that's what we hope. We hope that conservation will get us to where we need to be. But if we have to implement those other actions, then the rate could go up. And so my question is, how do we account for that if that happens? So it just relates to your question. We want to, if assumptions hold and this works, then the price will go down. And as Mary suggested, it would be good to do to show that.
Dan, do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, so I mean, to Director Circle's question, yeah, I mean, if we are successful, we implement these programs, we're in a sort of a status quo mode, that the level of effort necessary for administration and other things could go down. And that, we don't need to meet, well, I don't know, say monthly, we met 3 times in the last 4 weeks, it's the amount of effort that's going on. If I had to put together a budget based on the level of effort that we're doing right now and extrapolate that, it would be way higher than what we're showing right now. So we're trying to predict what are things gonna look like when we at least slow down from where we are today, but we're still busy implementing, and then, yeah, at some point it may even slow down beyond that. But we're trying to do our best guess at what we think the level of effort would be. I mean, for example, we're executive directors in another basin. It's an adjudicated basin, not a SGMA basin, but very similar requirements. They don't have to charge fees and other things. They don't have to implement a GFP, or it's not nearly as sort of requirement. They don't have to be 5-year eval. And the cost for that is $100,000, and the level of effort is much, much less than what is required for a SGMA basin. Just as an anecdote.
On this issue, I just want to raise one issue that also I'm going to drag Sanjay into it, but Sanjay, what we're talking about is either a 3 or 5 year window for these fees or an implementation period for these fees.
Yeah, so we're looking at, with Prop 218, you can adopt up to 5 years. I believe we're looking at 5 years to adopt, right, Dan?
I believe so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I would recommend. That's the most cost effective. You could do a study in 3 years from now, but
Yeah, fine.
And so if the agency's costs reduce, we would not have to undergo another Prop 218 process if the agency decides to reduce the amount of the fees.
But if for some reason we have to institute management measures that require more effort and more infrastructure costs that we can't get paid by grants, I'm just spinning out the scenario. I don't think it's gonna happen, but then what?
We'll have to have, if you're going to raise fees, you'll have another Prop 218 requirement.
Yeah.
And I think if I interpret it right, part of your question is what happens if we do see significant conservation? So now your revenue goes, you either have to reduce your level of service to match that, which maybe you could because you're being successful in achieving sustainability, but you would also have, if not, you would have to go back out.
Yeah, I realize just for the audience, we're going around these terms again. Proposition 218 was the constitutional amendment passed in 1996, I believe. And that required if a local agency is going to levy an assessment or a fee or charge, there's a process we have to follow. Previously, they didn't have to follow. Now they have to give notice and there's more public involvement in that process. So that's kind of what we're talking about. I'm sorry, I should have introduced that earlier in this discussion, but I realized that everybody may not be familiar with that term.
So did we end up giving direction?
Not yet. I'm
I
just,
think we were still in public.
yeah, we're public. Any more public? Okay. And then they're back to the board.
Mr. President, did you want me to address, this is Steve Anderson. Did you want me to address what I addressed to the board the last time about the litigation up in Northern California about the fees?
Sure.
Oh, thanks very much. And just as a reminder to the board, I'm counsel to ID1. So there was a legal challenge to fees adopted by a GSA in Tehama County that wound its way through the trial court system with a decision issued a couple of months ago where a court found that a fee of about 29 cents, if I remember correctly, 29 cents per acre over a great number of agricultural and other parcels in the county up there the judge deemed that a tax. And because it had not been approved by 2/3 voter approval, it was not justified. It was a tax and it was reversed and refunds were issued to all those landowners. So, and that of course was a SGMA fee. So just wanted to make the board aware of that.
Thank you. I wasn't certain where it came from, but thank you for repeating that for us. Okay, back to the board now. Any other questions? I'm gonna go to Dan. Okay, so we're still in this funding. Do you need direction at this point? Is that what you're looking for? Just
Yeah, general direction. I mean, it doesn't need to pick scenario A, but it's like, all right, we are okay with we have a preference for an earlier or late payback. We have a preference for potentially one of those scenarios with modifications. Sanjay and I need enough direction to put together a scenario and a report that we can bring back to you for formal consideration.
Well, just one point, I would have said we should just choose a late payback option because it gives us the most runway and it has the potential of giving us the lowest contingency scenario. But we now have a new variable on the table, which is 3% the right number? Do we need to move to 4%? It probably doesn't change our calculations significantly, but we should know.
Yeah.
So we need that checked off. But I would still say, even let's say it goes up 1% from 159,000 to, what would that be? Call it 170, it's not gonna move the needle, right? Not gonna move the needle. And it's gonna be constant across the rest of the scenario. So I would say late payment, I would have to kick for that because it does reduce risk, gives us most runway. I think we have the goodwill. If we can get there, we should look at those scenarios first.
Okay. A late payment, but did you mention contingency?
I think that I'm still gonna lean towards middle of the road contingency because there's too much there's too many variables. Why I understand. I think we're only talking about $1 difference. Right? And where we start with the rates.
And we could give direction, I think, you know, between 15 and 20% contingency. And again, I think the late payback is good, but I think Mary raised an interesting point, and that is if we could at least show beyond the 5 years, if this is successful in conserving what the price could be, not what it would be, but that it would come down, that the price is higher just as we're, you know, we've invested upfront costs that need to be paid back. But we've had a lot of plans and administrative overhead that we're working on, but if it all works, we can reduce the rate.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be a good real factor in selling, you know, the concept. I mean, these are big numbers to farmers that haven't paid them before. They're likely been bad communities in a reception, and so the farmers don't actually make the decisions on what gets grown. It's normally a shipper who's contracting for those crops, and so if we become uncompetitive, they'll take their, you know, farming activities to another location, which could give us another problem. Maybe it solves some of our water issues, but it could create other ones too. So I just want to say that I've seen that play out before in other basins, and
So what would you suggest out of these scenarios?
it sounds like there was consensus for the late payback.
Right.
And a 15% contingency. And brings back a plan that has maybe a factor for the other concepts so that we, you know, understand what they would be. We don't need them fully baked or, you know, but give us a ballpark.
I'm with that. Would you agree with that? Comparing the 15 to the 20% contingency scenario?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I think
It just gives us something to judge.
I think all we're doing is giving direction for the plan we're gonna get back. And
Yes.
the plan will drive our decision.
Yes.
Yeah.
Dan, did you understand and hear that?
I think I got most of it. We could use a little additional detail on the plan for the other concepts.
Can we,
It's talking about the management actions 2 and 3.
No, I'm talking about the
Percentage.
we have 4 plans here.
Right,
We're giving them direction on the one we think we want.
which is 4, but then.
Yeah, but there
we're 2.
Right, exactly.
Dan, can we move the slide to the scenarios? So that we all see what I just want to make, there's a summary slide?
And,
Page 43.
and I think to your point, Joan, I need permission to speak.
I just keep going.
I think we should ask for what the year after this would be, so that,
Mary's not even
right, we have,
year 5.
we have a concept. I
So
mean,
year 31, you're saying?
right.
Dan, did you understand? They want,
They want a 6th year and.
Well, just a straw man of what it might be in terms of.
right, because
Yeah.
the answer to this question,
So-
you know, can be paid everything,
So,
you know.
so how
paid-
many years do you want the financial plan to go out? I just want to make sure we meet your needs. We can go as far as you want. It's not I just need to know.
It's-
6 or 7. Why don't we go 7?
Yeah, I didn't think it was an extrapolation to fiscal year 2031 or 32. I thought you were driving towards what is
What's the
goodness
out
to look
year?
like
Our out
when we're
years
in a
is
sustainment mode. And what are the numbers, you know, realize, yeah. That's
So
where we're gonna go.
whether it's in the plan we're asking for here, or whether we ask Dan to calculate what it might be, this is a,
It would be part of our outreach effort.
right.
Okay, so we don't need to extend the modeling to additional fiscal years, but we do want us, the staff, to put together some thoughts on, you know, what could this look like? So successful.
Steady run right there after.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I just would make the one comment, right, that costs are not going to stay stable. So even if level of effort goes down, rates are still going to continue to rise. So it's not, I don't know that we'll ever be able to come back down to where, well, we'll look at it, but yeah.
But I think to Mary's point, we pay back everything And so everything, that's wiped off the slate, and then what are these rates gonna be now?
That's a great point, yes, yeah, with extending out the payback, it takes us all the way to the end of our.
Without the subsidies and the grants and other things that are propping this up right now.
It would be great to be able, like, I would press hard on, do we have to increase 5% every year in perpetuity? Because our fund balance is increasing every year. And that bothers me. We shouldn't be revenue positive generally as an agency. We should be flat.
But you do need a reserve.
You do. It's not that you go to zero, but your percentage increase shouldn't, we're an agency. We're not a profit generator.
Yeah, we're not profits, we don't wanna go there.
So, one more point, so there are other basins that are in litigation, and their land values have plummeted because there's uncertainty as to what the water costs will be going forward. So they're in, no one's making capital investments or expanding businesses because they can't tell. The same is true in other basins where people wanna make capital investments, they're gonna wanna understand what the ongoing run rate is going to be. And so that may be something we may want to, when we have data to look at, we don't now. But I'm just saying, these increased rates that go to a farmer ultimately find their way to the land rent, or either land rents or land values. And so, that's an argument for us to consider.
Jim?
Did we deal with Randy's points?
But, about the
About
interest in costs.
or about 20%.
The 20%.
The 20% was one, then the other point you made. was-
You talked about, they also talked about conservation, reducing the consumption.
Oh, yeah, and that's right, we need to put consumption.
Yeah. And I can't argue that point right here.
Yeah, because it's.
Yeah, the JPA does speak to the lake as part of the repayment interest, so that, I don't know, Sanjay, if we can model that. I don't know that we can predict the lake rate in the future, but that, we know what it is now, yeah. So that's one comment. I think, or at least what I'm hearing from the board, maybe extending the modeling scenarios to a 6th and a 7th year would help address a lot of the questions around what does the revenue need to look like once we've paid back? What does the revenue need to look like once we've hit our funding reserve target and we don't need to keep building additional reserves? Does that work for you, Sanjay?
Yeah, so I just want to summarize because I heard a lot. So scenario 2, and we're going to extend that out 2 years.
Scenario
4.
We're going to scenario 4 now. Okay.
I thought we said 2 and 4.
We'd like to look at both to see if there's a big difference between the 20 and 50.
I think we said scenario 4, and if you could give us some kind of a factor of what scenario 2, how that would impact it without the full report.
Yeah, we need a decision. I sort of need direction, which scenario, because we need numbers, like specific numbers. Those numbers will be, we need to make a decision so that I can have a report, people can see it, and that'll be in the board will receive it.
I thought we were gonna get away without a decision.
So which scenario are we want to do? I'm a little bit confused.
4, and that.
I'm willing to go to 15 with some anxiety.
Okay, so we're doing scenario 4 and extend it out 2 years.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks. Hey, Dan. Eddie. You're trying to rush along. No, just. Okay.
All right, yeah, hopefully these get a little easier and quick stuff. Next item is proposed well registration and metering program. Interest in time, I can go through this one pretty quickly. I mean, we presented to the board draft well registration and then metering policies. We've got a couple of slides just for the, potentially the new attendees that weren't at the other board meetings. We have a couple of why that's important. But well registration and metering, we're probably preaching to the choir here, but we can't manage groundwater unless we can measure it. and so we're gonna talk about how we've done that in the past, why we think registration metering is important, and then little bit about how that information could get used. So historically in the EMA, there's been a wide range of methods for estimating groundwater production. Meters are used by the municipal agencies and many if not all of the mutual water companies. And some private well owners have meters and report their production to the conservation district. Some conservation district customers use crop water use factors as a way of estimating their groundwater extraction and report those to the conservation district. And then satellite, OpenET estimates of evapotranspiration have been used for the basis of calculating agricultural production estimates outside of the conservation district's boundaries in the GSP, and in the annual reports. So next slide. So this is just a quick overview of how satellite ET estimates are calculated. Let's just kind of click through it. So, we have satellites. Oh, there must be some animation. Yeah. Satellites get data for the entire land surface. We intersect that with crop data sets that we get from a third-party provider. And so then we can get the specific evapotranspiration estimates for those fields on a bi-weekly or weekly basis. Next, click. Then we subtract the amount of precipitation that we think helped meet those evapotranspiration demands, apply an irrigation factor, efficiency factor, and then ultimately that's the estimate of how much groundwater we think is produced by agriculture from those fields. All right, so next slide. So how would we incorporate all these components? So we want to know where extractions are occurring. That's the registration piece. We want to know how much is being extracted. That's ultimately the metering piece. Right now, we don't have meters, so we need another method. So what's been proposed, what the board provided support and direction on, was using those satellite OpenET estimates for near-term calculations of groundwater pumped, but envisioned in the GSP and in discussions would be ultimately moving to a metering and reporting program, but that's going to take some time. And we just put this slide together just to kind of help explain the who, what, where, when, why of the well registration and metering. The who is basically everybody with a well registers, except potentially river extractors. When we get to metering, we want everybody to report, but not de minimis users, not river extractors. And if you have an inactive or abandoned well, we don't need you to report your production because we don't have it. And I think Larry was instrumental helping incorporate that. The what is pretty simple. We need well information for registration. For metering, we need meters and calibration procedures and reporting requirements. When, we envision that we can move forward with the registration ordinance much more quickly than a well metering ordinance. That's maybe not necessarily true, but I think we can move forward with well registration implementation and metering implementation. Where is pretty simple. It's the EMA GSA, and then I think we've kind of covered why. There is a nice bullet at the bottom that you may or may not be able to read, but it said, detailed instructions and forms and guidance would be mailed to landowners associated with the administration of the policy. Question?
So if de minimis users aren't metering, but we're charging them, on what basis do we charge them?
What's been discussed at this point would be a flat fee, based on some average assumption of de minimis water usage.
For the de minimis, we also have to have a calculation as to whether the 2 acre feet is reasonable, given if somebody has 20 acres of vineyard at their house and they're reporting it as de minimis, that's probably not, so that's another factor that has to do.
Yeah, we may need to work on that one.
And we've looked, the granularity of the crop land use data is pretty good. It gets down to fractions of acres. So if somebody's got, I think a fraction, certain fraction of an acre of a vineyard, that should get captured in the crop land use table.
Well, my wife's tomato plants ought to be in there.
Mr. Chairman,
Have some laid out for us.
whenever you're ready for it.
I'll get to Kevin.
Yeah, so that's the last slide.
Okay, any other questions? I have one, now how long do you expect to get all the meters installed? What are we looking at? How many years out?
I don't have a number there. I mean, that's really gonna be kind of board direction on how quickly you wanna require that implementation.
But just a rough estimate, because there's property out there that no one has meters, they're not paying anything out there.
But they'll be paying based on the.
Yeah.
That might be-
Well, each dollar, I'm wondering how long do you get them metered up?
Yeah, so in Los Alamos, it's gonna take like 3 years, right, Kevin?
2.
Yeah.
Start 3, that's it.
I mean, it's not going to happen. I mean, we're gonna fight some battles because like, especially old wells, when you go to cut the pipe to put in a meter, all the pipe's gonna, come apart. And, this is gonna be $10,000 or $15,000 bills that we're gonna be expecting people to pay. Some people are not going to wanna do that because they don't wanna do it, and others are not gonna be able to pay. And so I think hoping it's gonna happen quickly is probably is more than optimistic, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, and there's a certain percentage that are probably already metered that will get the data on early.
Right.
But, I think in San Antonio, which Kevin's mentioned, is a pretty friendly, ag-friendly basin, it's still gonna take a long time.
Okay, and then, getting old, I had 2 thoughts in my mind.
It's getting late.
Okay, the meters take some time. Oh, ET, how does that compare to meter? And I think Matt Young might have something on that in Kiama. Estimating. Yeah. Estimating through the photograph, the ET, to what actual meter. Do you have any experience with that?
So in Kuyama, they started with ET because folks were resistant to meters. But folks felt like the ET data that was reported didn't meet either what they had meters, but weren't reporting to the GSA or their intuitions of what their water use or their neighbor's water use was. And so then they switched to meters. Everybody agreed to meters after they saw the ET data. That we didn't see a direct comparison between the ET data and the meter data. But once people were metered, the reported pumping was significantly lower than was previously thought.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think that ET is gonna provide us. I mean, it's required under Prop 68, so we're gonna do it, but I think the reason we're doing it is because it's required.
Yeah, well, I'm just wondering if you have any experience with that. It'd be the same as Matt is saying, it's.
Well, it's kind of the catch too for those that may not want to do metering, like you were saying, so you just don't have the
I
ability.
think we're not gonna use the ET as a factor, we're gonna use satellite. We're gonna use either meters or satellite, right?
Yeah, satellite ET, they're kind of, the term, but
Yeah.
Oh, so during the period we're using the satellite data, does that give the signal about how much use each person is? Will we get the conservation signal that we're looking for with meters, with satellites?
It'll be harder to capture
Yeah, so I've looked at the MPT data a lot. And I think the question is if they conserve, will the ET data show a reduced production of wind? Absolutely. Year over year, it shows the changes in young crops grow and older crops and use more use. It shows difference in different water use types too. So
Great.
meters are secure.
The meters will give you more real-time reduction as opposed to waiting for the year and then a read. Is that? That's okay. Okay, that's good. That's good.
The meters will give you the total use between the reads. Right, you read it every 6 months, you'll know how much was used in those 6 months.
Right.
So, or every year, you'll know how much was used that year, so that real time is only as good as.
Better, better real time.
Yeah.
But I'll bet the landowner, if they got a meter on there, they're looking at that sucker all the time, and they're gonna learn how much water is actually needed for their crops versus maybe overwatering. They're gonna be able to refine their usage.
And can I just add to your question, so the satellites would capture fallowed land because it wouldn't show up in, it wouldn't have an evapotranspiration signal. It would capture changes from new crops to old crops because it really looks at the surface area of the leaf material. And so it would capture that. It wouldn't capture, say, a conversion from sprinklers to drip or some sort of efficiencies associated with the irrigation method, because again, it just looks at the plant.
Yeah, that's a good point. Are there any low interest loans available to help people in the transition?
It's a great question. Yeah, I'm not.
I'll just say the county water agency, does have a metering subsidy program. So once the GSA requires a meter, we contribute, up to $500, towards reimbursement, towards the loan, or towards the cost of the meter. I know meters are very expensive, for tax reasons. That's the most we can contribute. But it's not everything, but it's.
I think there's other grant monies available, at least in Fox Canyon and Oxnard, it was a much larger subsidy than $500.
Wouldn't the Ag Bureau and Farm Bureau have information on that? They seem like they'd be up on those kind of things.
I mean, I think when we do the public relations engagement, we want to have as much information about how we can cushion the hit.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, yeah, Kevin, sorry for the delay.
That's all right. So just one thing to keep in mind. So we looked at the satellite ET information to replace meters in San Antonio. So I talked to the folks at Semi-Tropic over in Wasco, and I talked to other people. I talked to the Wet Sound folks at Fresno State. Satellite system doesn't work real well here in the summertime because of the fog. It can't see through the fog, so it can't get needed. So they told me flat out, satellites for you guys in the air don't work very well. The other thing that is an advantage though, in a parent district, for example, we have the 800-acre vineyard here next door. It goes all within the district, they're all on meters. And we report that water use twice a year, and we take those readings monthly. So we know what we're using there. So those meters are in place. Whatever ones we have in the parent district, you don't have to worry about them, they're in. You have a slider that said that they can use evapotranspiration, turn it in. So parent district doesn't let you do that anymore. You have to have a meter on the well to turn that in. So at least those wells, you've got a meter on. But the satellite can be careful of it because of the fog. Depends on the year.
That's in the morning, we should clear, don't we?
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, I think the understanding is it's not perfect. But it is one of the better available, methods without physically having a meter. And if it's an incentive for somebody to put on a meter, that's probably a good thing. Cause I think we would envision that if somebody has a meter that they want to give us the data that differs from satellite, we're happy to take that.
So we've got to get our metering program in place.
So yeah, they put something in like this. Yeah.
And publicize its benefits.
Okay, any more discussion on this? Yes, sir.
I'm just curious about the metering cost, the way you brought that up. I appreciate that. And I heard you mention that there is maybe federal funding for water infrastructure.
That a big state
State?
bond, yeah.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if there's some way those could come together to where there is a reimbursement program for people to not have to accept that initial blow of the meter cost.
The state is figuring out how they're gonna spend this money. They haven't really told us yet. I guess there's lobbying opportunities for that.
Maybe like NRCS would have some
Yeah.
input.
you know, one more thing about Oxnard and, the way they controlled it as a agency was that, they met with several vendors and got the vendors to agree to fix pricing. If they got, you know,
Hundreds or whatever.
yeah, hundreds, and it substantially lowered the price. That was the price that was reimbursed, so that it, you know, caused quicker, cooperation. And so maybe an effort to locate whether that state money is available might speed it up. I mean, to your point,
That's a good idea. Okay, yes, ma'am.
So I already asked Daniel these questions, but just to kind of reiterate, we were looking to replace flow meters on our wells, and we sort of put pause on that pending what the metering program's gonna be. And I had asked about, were there gonna be like specifications around the accuracy and what, you know, the tolerances and frequency of calibration and all these things that, you know, the regional water company is gonna have to pick up on our wells. And then, you know, what we have, because our wells are larger obviously than the private wells. I just want to encourage that we get some sort of specifications together and expectations for what these meters are and what the cost, because this really has to be part of that knowledge for the homeowners, because if they're gonna be, you know, the ones with private wells are gonna have to be paying out this money. I totally agree. You know, what's the cost and what are the options for some relief on that? But just from the mutual water company standpoint, I'm very interested in, you know, what are the specifications? And I also asked Daniel if there was some thought about eventually going to a smart meter where, you know, it's communicating with a system remotely.
Yep.
So, and if you're gonna do that, and we're looking at forking out money twice, if we got, you know, I'll say a more mechanical or magnetic type meter system, wasn't smart per se. You know, and then we're gonna have to go back and pay for smart meter later, so this kind of thing can be ironed out so that those of us who are, you know, gonna be doing it right away, potentially would know what we should be getting. Maybe, you know, I don't know if there's, I'm not familiar with the smart meters for large wells, we certainly have them on our homeowners' properties, you know, metering their water use, but I don't know what that looks like for a big well that's producing, you know, 250, 300 gallons per minute.
Doug?
so, I know in Los Alamos, Kevin could speak to it, we're gonna accept any well that can be certified as accurate, irregardless of brand.
And meter.
Sorry, meter, any meter, any brand of meter. And I believe we have like 5 brands that we suggest if they're buying new. Because we think if we can get the data at all, we'll be ahead of the game.
Right.
And to the smart meter, you know, again, in Oxnard, we have a camera on top of every meter, and it takes a picture on the first of every month and sends it into a data collection source. And those cameras came substantially later than the initial well metering program went out. So, you know, the kind of numbers I was talking about are not smart meters, they're dumb meters. And, you know, so I think in order to get compliance, it might be a 2-step deal just because, you know, how much they cost.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, and then, well, we had several months ago, someone come and, you know, and talk about those meters. And, yeah, we want to get the best deal on them and the most accurate ones. Definitely. Dan?
Just, I thought there was a question about cost, but looking back at that presentation, yeah, it was somewhere in between $2,000 to $6,000, depending on the size and type of meter, just for reference.
I guess one thought is that if we get the kinds of meters we're going to accept, you know, there are people putting in meters and doing well work, you know, maintenance work. If they knew what we were intending, we might get some compliance because people are in the process, and so that should be fast tracked.
So, Dan, did you catch that? That's a good idea.
Yeah, no, I got that. It's a good segue to,
Oh, well, I just wanted to underscore the idea of finding vendors who will give us a discounted price if we put them on our short list of recommended meter types and vendors. Discount.
Good. Any more discussion on that? I'm looking everywhere. Seeing
Stop
none.
looking.
Moving on to the schedule.
Yeah, this is just one slide, high level schedule, hard to read, but well registration on the top, well metering at the bottom. You see, registration, leads and it gets implemented more quickly. Well metering takes a little while longer in this conceptual schedule. We can talk with staff and board about that. Implementation likely takes quite a bit longer. And then the Prop 218 rate study is shown at the bottom, which is, as we all know, on a very accelerated schedule to get done this year to get on the tax roll for next fiscal year. And again, this is conceptual. This is what we're shooting for, but we're also looking for direction from the board. All of this.
Any input from CAG on that, the schedule? Public and none, back and forth, and exactly what you want, Dan. Great. Okay. Okay, item 4 now, Dan.
Date and time for the next regular special meeting. So I think what we talked about is, and it was in Sanjay's schedule, we've got some very tight time constraints. We've got public noticing requirements. So I would like to schedule a meeting for April 17th of the board.
That we previously had scheduled.
Now, a regularly scheduled meeting, I believe, is the following week, which I don't believe works with our overall schedule for Prop 218 noticing. So it would be a special date and time. Was that the third Thursday? The third Thursday instead of the fourth Thursday.
That's the day before Good Friday. I don't know if that's, Sherman's vacation or anything.
Can do it, I'll have to do the meeting, I can do it. And the time is 4.
The current agreed upon time would be 4.
Fine.
We'll make it 5.
You can make it whatever you want. Well,
I've got
to cancel late, but
It sounds like 5.
5. Yeah.
And then cancel the 24th.
Yep.
That's what next.
Yeah, next week.
No, that's canceled. Next week's canceled, right?
Yes, next week is canceled. Or yes. Yeah. No,
You will send out a memo with these exact dates.
Yeah, they'll go on the website. We'll put out a calendar invite for the board and staff, so it gets on their schedules.
Okay.
But that item.
Okay, now, number 5. Board reports.
I have some, just met last night. I know Bill's not here, but we did make a change with respect to the EMA. So I'm continuing as the primary, but Steve Jordan will be back as the alternate. And Bill is here. We also changed on the WMA. Steve is in the lead role. Bill is will be back up there.
Okay. Okay, future agenda, items. You ready for that, Dan?
Yep.
Anybody have any?
I think we got a whole plate.
Do worse out.
Okay, we're gonna be able to cap the budget in the next.
Yeah, we talked about is coming back on 17th with a formal request for the additional funding from the member agencies, the budget and the rate study report.
Okay, so the rest will be there. Okay, in the time schedule, you have that, so. Well, we already decided to delay.
Yeah, that we got the direction.
And additional money, do we need to?
That'll be one, the additional
Yeah.
funding.
Gotta check.
Okay, making sure we got them on there so we can do
I have one request.
Okay.
We're changing a lot of these dates. If you could put some thought into, further out, whether we're gonna be changing dates, it'd be helpful for calendars.
Yeah, agreed, yeah. Yeah, we'll look at, the rate study's driving along, so we'll look at, see what additional meeting dates we need to schedule.
Yeah, better to schedule them and cancel them than.
Yeah.
Possible.
Oh, I agree, sure. Sure. There's nothing I hate more than trying to schedule meetings.
Yeah, just that, we kind of set a precedent, I think, years ago with the fourth Thursday, so, with Thanksgiving and Christmas, then it's not gonna work, but if we can get back to that battle rate, that'd be great, but understand, we're racing to satisfy the schedule, that's why in the near term, dates are gonna shift now, maybe when we get to July, things can go back to,
Oh, you're so optimistic.
instead of this continual sprint.
Okay, I think we're ready. John?